There is something about the Fallout universe that gets under your skin in the best possible way. Not the radiation, not the mutants, not even the desolate stretches of blasted landscape that go on for miles and miles without a single living thing making a sound. It is the feeling that behind every terminal entry, beneath every collapsed building, inside every crumbling vault, there is a story. A real one. Something that happened to someone, something that mattered deeply to them, something that the bombs erased in an instant and left half-finished, preserved like an insect in amber. That is what we are doing tonight. We are going to settle in, slow things down, and wander through some of the deepest, strangest, most quietly haunting corners of the Fallout universe. There is no rush here. Some of these mysteries have been sitting in the lore for over 2 decades, and they will keep. The Wasteland does not hurry for anyone. Whether you already know these games by heart or you are coming to Fallout fresh after watching the television series, what follows is meant to be a long, calm journey through a world that is rich beyond what most people realize. A world built on layers of tragedy and dark humor, on corporate greed and human stubbornness, on the occasional miracle and the much more frequent catastrophe. So go ahead and get comfortable. The fires of civilization have already gone out. All we can do now is walk through the ashes and try to understand what was here before. Part 1. The world that was understanding what was lost. To understand the mysteries of Fallout, you first have to understand what the world looked like before the bombs fell. And that world was not our world. It looked similar on the surface, spoke English, had Coca-Cola, and drive-in movies and suburban neighborhoods with white picket fences. But underneath all of that, the history had branched away from ours decades earlier, following a different path that led to a very particular kind of doom. In the Fallout timeline, the transistor was never miniaturized the way it was in our world. That single technological divergence changed everything. Because without miniaturized transistors, computers stayed enormous, clunky things. Vacuum tubes remained the dominant technology well into the 21st century, which is why the aesthetic of the Fallout world looks the way it does, gleaming chrome and rounded edges. Retrofuturism locked in a vision of the future that 1950s America imagined but never quite reached. The cars run on atomic energy. The robots look like something out of a 1956 science fiction serial, and the propaganda posters have that cheerful, brightly colored quality that suggests everything is absolutely fine. No need to worry. Have a Nuka-Cola and relax. But underneath that carefully maintained surface, things were very much not fine. The oil ran out. That is the simple version of the story, though the truth is more complicated. By the early 21st century, global petroleum reserves were critically depleted, and the major powers of the world, primarily the United States and China, had entered into an increasingly desperate competition for what was left. The resource wars began in 2052, when the European Commonwealth dissolved into chaos as member nations fought over the last accessible oil fields in the Middle East. The United Nations, already weakened, collapsed entirely in 2052. The world was fracturing. The United States, meanwhile, had developed its own particular brand of paranoia. The government expanded in ways that would alarm anyone who valued personal freedom. The Enclave, a shadowy continuation of the American executive branch, began operating in the shadows long before anyone knew it existed. Megacorporations grew to unprecedented power. Vault-Tec, Robco Industries, General Atomics International, and others became effectively more powerful than many governments, operating with near-total impunity under the assumption that their technological contributions to national security made them untouchable. In 2066, the Sino-American War began in earnest when China invaded Alaska in an attempt to seize the last significant oil reserves in North America. The United States responded with everything it had. Power armor, the walking tanks that would become such an iconic image of the wasteland, was developed and deployed in this conflict. The liberation of Anchorage, Alaska, in January 2077, was celebrated as a great American victory. Propaganda billboards went up across the country. Patriotism reached a feverish pitch, and 9 months later, in October of 2077, the bombs fell. Nobody knows who fired first. That question will come up again later, and it is one of the most genuinely contested historical mysteries in the entire Fallout universe. What is known is that on the 23rd of October, 2077, nuclear warheads began landing across the United States, China, and eventually much of the developed world. The exchange lasted approximately 2 hours. In those 2 hours, civilization ended. What replaced it is what we call the wasteland. But here is something worth sitting with for a moment. The war was not a surprise to everyone. The bombs did not catch the entire population unaware. Some people knew or suspected what was coming, and they had made preparations. Vault-Tec had been building vaults for years, officially framed as nuclear shelters for a portion of the American population. The lottery system for vault placement was presented as fair. The company's advertising was cheerful and reassuring, featuring the iconic Vault Boy mascot giving a thumbs up against a backdrop of mushroom clouds made to look almost friendly. The truth behind the vaults, as we will explore in considerable depth, was something else entirely. Something far darker and more revealing about the people who built them and the government that authorized them. But first, it is worth considering what it meant to be a person alive in the final years before the Great War. What was daily life like? Because the records preserved in terminal entries and holotapes and old magazines scattered across the wasteland paint a picture that is deeply human in the way that ruins always are. People had birthdays. They fought with their spouses. They worried about their mortgages. Children scraped their knees and argued over what to watch on television. People fell in love and made dinners and complained about their commutes. All of that was erased in less time than it takes to watch a movie. The things that survived were either the most durable steel structures, concrete bunkers, pre-war safes, or the most meaningful, the things people kept close and never let go of. A soldier's journal still legible under a layer of ash. A child's drawing, pinned to a refrigerator in a home that no longer has walls. A terminal entry from a Vault-Tec employee, written at 3 inches the morning because they could not sleep, because they knew what was in the vaults and they could not tell anyone. That sense of interrupted humanity is what gives the Fallout universe its particular emotional texture. It is not a world about the apocalypse. It is a world about the aftermath. About what people carry with them into the dark. About what survives when everything else is taken away. And some of what survived was not good. The corporations that had dominated pre-war life did not simply dissolve when the bombs fell. They mutated, transformed. The Enclave continued to operate in secret, convinced that they were the legitimate government of the United States, even 200 years after there was no United States left to govern. The Brotherhood of Steel emerged from a splinter group of the U.S. Army, dedicated to preserving pre-war technology, sometimes at enormous human cost. Raiders filled the power vacuum left by collapsed law enforcement. And deep underground, in secure bunkers and sealed vaults, other things were happening that the wasteland's surface dwellers could not see or even imagine. The ghosts of the old world do not rest quietly in Fallout. They walk around in power armor, or operate from hidden facilities, or whisper in your ear from ancient terminals and holotapes. The pre-war world is never truly gone. It is just changed, distorted, scattered across the ash like the pieces of something that was broken so violently that nobody can agree on what it looked like before. And that is where the mysteries begin. Some of them have answers that can be found if you look hard enough. In the right terminal, in the right NPC's dialogue, in the right piece of environmental storytelling. Others are genuinely open questions, things the developers left deliberately unresolved, loose threads that catch your attention and will not let go. And some of them are so deeply buried in the lore, so far from the main path of any given game, that most players never encounter them at all. We are going to find all of them. But before we go too far into the dark, it is worth taking one more moment to appreciate the scale of what the Fallout world built. The games span a geographic area covering most of the continental United States. Fallout 1 and 2 were set in California. Fallout 3 brought us to the ruins of Washington, D.C. New Vegas took us to the Mojave Desert. Fallout 4 put us in the wreckage of Boston. Fallout 76 sent us to Appalachia, the mountains and forests of West Virginia. Each location has its own culture, its own history, its own particular way that the apocalypse played out, and each one has its own collection of unanswered questions. This is not a world that has forgotten it had secrets. It is a world that has preserved them carefully, wrapped in concrete and sealed behind locked doors, waiting for someone stubborn enough to break them open. We are going to be those people tonight. We are going to walk slowly through 200 years of post-apocalyptic history and take our time with the things that do not have easy explanations. The wasteland is very quiet this time of night. The ferals have gone to ground. The wind coming down off the hills carries the smell of something that might be rain, though rain in the wasteland is not always something you want to stand in. Light a lamp. Pour something warm. We have a long walk ahead of us. Hey, before we go any deeper into the wasteland, drop a comment below and let us know where in the world you are watching from and what time it is. There is something special about knowing people are settling in to listen from all over the place. And if this is the kind of content that puts your mind at ease, consider subscribing. It really does help more than you know. Now, on to the vaults. Part 2. The vaults. What Vault-Tec was really doing underground. Of all the things that make the Fallout universe what it is, the vaults might be the most quietly horrifying. Not because of what is inside them, though. What is inside them is often terrible, but because of the gap between what they were supposed to be and what they actually were. The official story was simple. Vault-Tec, a private corporation with significant government contracts, was commissioned to build a network of underground shelters across the United States. These vaults would house select portions of the American population in safety, while the surface was rendered uninhabitable by nuclear war. They would be comfortable, well-supplied, and staffed by trained overseer personnel. When conditions on the surface improved to acceptable levels, the vaults would open and their inhabitants would repopulate and rebuild America. That was the brochure version. The actual version is that only a handful of the vaults referred to in internal documentation as control vaults were ever designed to function as genuine shelters. The vast majority were something else: laboratories. Each one was designed around a specific social or scientific experiment, and the residents were the test subjects, almost never with their knowledge or consent. The organization behind these experiments was ultimately the Enclave, the shadow government that saw the approaching nuclear war not as a catastrophe to be prevented, but as an opportunity. The vaults would generate data about human behavior under extreme conditions. How did populations respond to isolation? To artificial scarcity? To psychological manipulation? How long could a community survive with a deeply flawed social structure before it collapsed? The Enclave wanted to know, because the Enclave had a plan for what came after the bombs, a plan that required knowing how humans could be shaped and controlled. What followed was, by any measure, one of the longest and most systemic acts of human cruelty in the history of the Fallout universe. Across dozens of vaults, hundreds of thousands of people were sealed underground, unaware that the conditions of their new homes had been carefully designed to hurt them in particular ways. Consider Vault 11, located in the Mojave Desert. Its residents were informed by the vault's computer system that one resident must be sacrificed each year. If the sacrifice was not made, the computer threatened to kill everyone. What the residents were never told, and what the game reveals in one of its most devastating audio logs, is that the threat was a bluff. The computer would never have killed anyone. The sacrifice demand was the experiment itself. Vault-Tec wanted to know if a community would kill one of its own members to preserve the rest of the group. And the answer, played out in painful detail in the ruins of Vault 11 by the time the lone wanderer finds it, is yes, they did. For years. They built political factions around who would be sacrificed next. They went to war over it. By the end, only 5 people were left alive, and those 5 had finally refused to make the sacrifice and discovered too late that the computer was never going to do anything to them. Those 5 survivors were offered the choice to leave or to stay and run the vault's defense systems. Most chose to end things there. The vault is empty when you find it. The only thing left is the audio log, telling the whole story in a voice that has already accepted that none of it could be taken back. Vault 92, also in the capital wasteland, housed some of the most talented musicians in the pre-war world. They were told the vault was a program to preserve musical culture for future generations. The actual experiment involved white noise frequencies piped through the vault's sound system frequencies, specifically designed to trigger episodes of extreme violence in the listeners. The goal was to test methods of creating a programmable soldier, someone who could be turned violent on command. The experiment was wildly out of control, long before the Great War ended. By the time anyone finds Vault 92, it is full of corpses and the evidence of what had clearly been a massacre. Vault 87, which plays a significant role in Fallout 3's main story, was the site of deliberate FEV forced evolutionary virus exposure. The residents were sealed inside, and then the FEV was released into the ventilation system. Those who did not die became super mutants. The super mutants that roam the capital wasteland for the entirety of Fallout 3 all originate from Vault 87, people who, 200 years ago, were civilians, engineers, school teachers, parents. Vault 106 introduced psychoactive drugs into the air filtration system 10 days after the door was sealed, without the residents' knowledge. The effects were predictably catastrophic. Vault 95, out in the Commonwealth, was designed specifically as a cruelty wrapped in apparent kindness. It presented itself as a rehabilitation vault, a place where people who struggled with addiction to chems could find support and treatment in the safety of the underground. Residents made real progress. The program was working. And then, at a predetermined moment, a Vault-Tec agent disguised as a fellow resident revealed a hidden cache of chems in the middle of the night. The experiment was simple. Find out what happens to a recovering population when you put the thing they are recovering from directly in front of them. The answer, preserved in the rubble and skeleton-strewn halls of Vault 95, is not uplifting. Vault 75, under a school in Malden, Massachusetts, was arguably the most disturbing of all. It accepted families, adults, and children under the guise of being a standard shelter. The adults were liquidated shortly after the door sealed. The children were kept. They were subjected to a rigorous program of genetic selection and physical conditioning, the stated goal of which was to improve the human genome for post-war survival. Children who failed to meet performance benchmarks were killed when they reached the age of 18. The ones who succeeded were subjected to increasingly extreme conditioning. The scale of what Vault-Tec was doing and what the Enclave sanctioned is staggering when you try to hold all of it in your mind at once. This was not a handful of rogue scientists conducting unauthorized experiments. This was a coordinated, government-backed program of mass human experimentation, conducted on hundreds of thousands of people who had paid for the privilege of being kept safe. And here is the part that carries the most weight in the context of everything the Fallout universe becomes. The Enclave's plan for the vaults ultimately failed. The data they collected was real, but the plan to use it to rebuild America in the Enclave's image, with a purified population cleansed of radiation exposure, collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. The Enclave continued to exist for 200 years after the bombs fell, convinced of its own righteousness, and was ultimately destroyed by the same kinds of ordinary people it had always dismissed and manipulated. But the vaults themselves had lives of their own that went beyond anyone's plan. Some vaults produced genuine communities. Vault 81 near Boston was designed to test experimental cures for diseases by infecting residents without their knowledge, but the vault's overseer quietly sabotaged the experiments to protect her people, and Vault 81 survived relatively intact. Vault 21 inches New Vegas had its social order determined entirely by gambling. All disputes, resource allocation, and leadership decisions were settled by games of chance. Vault 22, also in the Mojave, was designed to develop food production technology, but the plants inside were exposed to a fungal pathogen that proved to be fantastically dangerous and transformed the vault into a botanical horror show. Vault 101, the first vault players ever experience in Fallout 3, was designed around a single experiment. What happens to a vault that is never supposed to open? The door was sealed permanently. The residents were never told. Generations grew up believing that the outside world was uninhabitable and that the vault was all there was. The overseer became an absolute authority figure because when there is no exit, there is no alternative. That authority corrupted across generations, and by the time the lone wanderer is born inside Vault 101 inches, 2,258, the vault has developed a deeply authoritarian social structure that punishes curiosity and dissent. And then there are the vaults we know about that still raise questions. Vault 11's sacrifice system ended, but who built the system in the first place? And why choose that particular experiment? Vault 75's program of genetic selection was supposedly aimed at creating superior post-war survivors, but superior by whose standard, and for what specific purpose? The vaults connected to the Enclave's long game raise questions about timelines and intentions that the games have never fully resolved. Then there are the vaults we do not know much about at all. References appear in terminal entries and loading screens to vault numbers we have never visited. Vault 29, which accepted only children under 15, separating them from their parents, who were sent to different vaults. Vault 68, which contained 1 woman and 999 men. Vault 69, which contained 1 man and 999 women. The social outcomes of either of those vaults are left entirely to the imagination. There is also the question of what happened in the vaults where the experiment was simply to do nothing the control vaults. Did they actually produce the stable, psychologically healthy communities that the theory predicted? In the absence of designed cruelty, did people just quietly organize themselves and wait? There is evidence both ways scattered through the lore, and the answer is probably that human beings are complicated enough that even a vault with no engineered catastrophe would still produce conflict and struggle simply because human beings always do. The vaults work as a metaphor for something real and familiar, the relationship between institutions and the people they claim to serve. Every vault was built on the premise that the people inside needed to be managed, studied, shaped, that they could not simply be trusted to figure things out for themselves. And nearly every vault failed, spectacularly or quietly, because that premise was wrong. Human beings do not thrive when they are treated as subjects rather than people. The vaults that came closest to success were the ones where someone in a position of power chose to honor that humanity rather than exploit it. That lesson is not a comfortable one when you consider how much the Enclave and Vault-Tec before it looked like legitimate institutions from the outside. They had marketing, they had uniforms, they had official seals and government contracts. The horror of the vault system is not that it was done by monsters. It was done by people who convinced themselves that the data was worth the cost. Walking through an empty vault in any of the Fallout games, reading the terminal entries of people who never understood what was happening to them, is one of the quieter and more devastating experiences these games offer. There is no dramatic music. There is no monster lurking around the corner. There is just a record of ordinary people trying to live their lives inside a system that was never on their side. The bombs fell in October of 2077. The experiments began almost immediately. Some of them are still running, 200 years later, in vaults that have never been found. The data is still being collected. The subjects, the few that remain, have no idea they are subjects at all. Part 3. The Dunwich Horror, when Fallout touched something much older. There is a location in the southwest corner of Fallout 3's Capital Wasteland map that most players could walk past without a second glance. An old office building, dark and rotting, sitting alone in a barren stretch of land with no road leading to it. There are no obvious quest markers pointing toward it. No compelling reason to go there unless you are the sort of person who likes to explore every square inch of a map. The building is called Dunwich, and it is one of the most carefully constructed pieces of horror storytelling in any game I have ever played. The name is the first signal for those who recognize it. H.P. Lovecraft wrote a story in 1929 called The Dunwich Horror, set in a remote, dying Massachusetts town where dark rituals are practiced by an ancient family and something vast and unknowable stirs beneath the hills. Bethesda did not name their building Dunwich by accident. They were drawing a very deliberate line between the Fallout universe, a setting built on nuclear war and radiation, and human folly and something older, something that predates all of that. When you enter Dunwich, the first thing you notice is that the feral ghouls inside behave differently than other ferals. They are not simply wandering or shambling. They seem to be organized around a purpose, gathered in particular parts of the building in ways that suggest ritual rather than random habitation. The audio logs you find as you descend are what bring the real story into focus. The logs belong to a man named Jaime. He came to Dunwich looking for his father, who had gone there chasing what he described in a letter as the book, an old blood-stained tome made of unusual leather that he had acquired somewhere. The letter described his father as a little nuts, and Jaime set out to find him with a mixture of concern and embarrassment, the way you might go looking for a relative who has gone off the deep end about something. As the audio logs continue, following Jaime deeper into the building, the tone changes. He stops talking about his father the way you talk about a troubled relative. He starts talking about him the way you talk about someone who has been taken by something. He hears whispers in the walls. He sees things that could be hallucinations. Items in his bags move on their own. The temperature in certain rooms drops for no apparent reason. And deep in the lowest level of the building, in a cavern that the architectural floor plan has no business containing, Jaime finds his father. His father has become a feral ghoul. He is kneeling before an obelisk. The obelisk is the centerpiece of what Dunwich actually is. It is a structure that does not belong to the Fallout universe's established canon, not in the way that radiation explains ghouls or the FEV explains supermutants. It is something else, something ancient. It is covered in vines and has a figure seemingly trying to claw its way out of the stone, a humanoid shape half emerged and frozen. Feral ghouls kneel before it. The radiation readings in the room spike to levels that should not be achievable through conventional contamination. And the whispers that Jaime mentions in his last audio log, mostly incoherent ramblings about temples and feasts, and the return of someone named Abdul, echo in the room itself. Players who move through that specific doorway experience a visual hallucination, a flash of the pre-war era that lingers just long enough to leave an impression before shattering. And Jamie's final words, barely intelligible through the static of a man who has been broken by whatever lives in that room, include a word that recurs throughout the space: Al-Hazred. Abdul Al-Hazred is the name of the fictional author of the Necronomicon in Lovecraft's mythology, the mad Arab who supposedly compiled the most dangerous collection of forbidden knowledge ever assembled. His name does not belong in Fallout, and yet there it is, whispered by a man driven to madness in a building named for a Lovecraft story, kneeling before an object that has no rational explanation. The Point Lookout DLC for Fallout 3 added another layer to this. Out in the foggy, radiation-soaked marshes of what used to be southern Maryland, a man named Obadiah Blackhall lives alone in an old manor house. He asks you to retrieve something for him, a book, stolen by the local swamp folk. The book is called the Krivbekni. The Krivbekni is a large blood-stained tome with unusual leather binding. If you pick it up in the underground ritual site where the swamp folk keep it, a deep, dark chamber lit by no visible light source, with bones arranged on a central table and the sense that the air itself is wrong, it triggers something. Objects on the table begin shaking and sliding on their own. Swamp folk pour into the chamber from every direction, furious, driven to what seems like genuine panic at the theft of their sacred object. If you follow the chain of information far enough, a connection emerges. The Krivbekni's history in Point Lookout is tied to a woman named Constance Blackhall, who lived long after the bombs fell and who gathered a circle of devotees around the book. She lived, according to local legend, an unnaturally long life, longer than radiation sickness and environmental exposure should have allowed. When the Krivbekni was eventually stolen from her, she died. The death that should have found her generations earlier arrived the moment the book left her possession. And cut content from the game files reveals that Obadiah Blackhall's ancestry connects to a man named Richard Dunwich, the founder of the Dunwich Borers LLC, the company that operated in the building back in the capital wasteland. The Dunwich and Blackhall families, across hundreds of years and hundreds of miles, were connected. Both lines were devoted to something older than the bombs, older than the vaults, older than the country whose ruins they were living in. In Fallout 4, the connection deepened again. Dunwich Borers appears as a massive quarry in the Commonwealth, carved deep into the earth by a company operating under the same name. The company's history of odd behavior is documented in terminal entries. Workers reported hearing things, feeling watched. A project manager's notes describe private flashback sequences, moments where the present world vanished and was replaced by visions of a pre-war ceremony, a man with a knife standing before an audience of bound figures. When the vision ends, those same bound figures have become feral ghouls. At the very bottom of Dunwich Borers, beneath the flooded lower levels, beneath the place where the rock has been cut into and shaped by human hands, there is a pool of dark water. And at the bottom of that pool, barely visible through the murk, is a face, an enormous stone face, Art Deco styling, looking up at nothing. A crane was installed above it. The company was trying to lift it. Whatever was buried beneath the quarry, Dunwich Borers LLC wanted to dig it up. Their excavations triggered something. The visions, the paranoia, the violence that spread through the raider gang occupying the site by the time the player arrives, all of it traces back to whatever was sleeping in the deep stone. Players also notice something else. The stone face at the bottom of the pool shares its model with the Art Deco decorative sculptures found in the Commonwealth abstract human faces mounted on pre-war buildings across the region. If that observation is correct, it suggests a connection between the entity sleeping beneath Dunwich and the aesthetic choices of pre-war Boston architecture, which would mean the influence of whatever Dunwich borers was digging for extended far beyond a single quarry. In Fallout 76, the thread continues. The game takes place in West Virginia, geographically and culturally distant from Massachusetts. But in the Lucky Hole mine in Appalachia, players find something at the very bottom, a creature called the Interloper, enormous and plant-like and dormant, surrounded by the same Art Deco face sculptures that appear near the Dunwich site in Fallout 4. The Interloper is worshipped by a splinter faction of the Mothman cult, who call it the Firstborn of the Wood. Members of the same cult who became aware of it were encouraged by the more theologically conservative elements of the group to stop talking about it entirely. Brother Scarberry, when asked about the Interloper, goes visibly quiet and says only, "It is in your best interest to drop this line of inquiry." The name Ugg Qualtoth appears in connection with the obelisk in the original Dunwich building. The entity is never seen, never described, never confirmed. What Bethesda has built across 3 games and multiple DLCs is a suggestion consistent, carefully maintained, but never fully articulated that the Fallout universe contains something beneath the surface that has nothing to do with nuclear war or human technology. Something ancient. Something that was sleeping in the deep rock long before the first American walked on this continent. Something that may have already been attracting worship when the country that would eventually bomb itself out of existence was still just a collection of scattered settlements. The bombs did not create every horror in the Fallout world. Some of them were already here. They were just waiting for the noise and light to stop so they could be heard again. What is Ugg Qualtoth? What is the Interloper? Are they the same entity or different members of some older order of beings that Lovecraft pointed at when he wrote about cosmic horror? Are the Dunwich and Blackhall families still worshipping after 200 years of nuclear winter, or have they finally run out of descendants? The games have never answered those questions. They have only added more evidence that the questions are the right ones to be asking. Walking through the Dunwich building at night, with the audio turned up and the game's ambient sound design doing what it was designed to do, is an experience that stays with you. It is not a jump scare. It is not a boss fight. It is the slow, building realization that the world you thought you were in, a post-nuclear action RPG with a retro aesthetic, has a basement that goes much, much deeper than you expected. And at the bottom of that basement, something has been kneeling in the dark for a very long time. Part 4. The Man in the Coat, Tracking the Mysterious Stranger. He shows up without warning. You are in the middle of a fight. Things are going badly, and then a guitar riff, 3 notes, and a man in a long coat and a fedora appears at the edge of your vision. He fires once, the enemy drops. He is gone before you can turn around to look at him properly. The mysterious stranger has been appearing in Fallout games since the very first one, and across nearly 3 decades of games set across half a century of post-war time, nobody has ever established who he is, where he comes from, how he gets from place to place, or why he helps the people he helps. In Fallout 3, the official game guide describes him as an odd and eldritch entity who appears to aid players in combat before they draw their dying breath. The word eldritch is doing significant work in that sentence. It is the same word used to describe the atmosphere around things like the Dunwich building, things that do not fit neatly into any rational framework. The guide is not describing the mysterious stranger as a man with unusual skills or mysterious origins. It is hinting at something fundamentally different. His record is extraordinary. The mysterious stranger has been documented in the following places, at roughly the following times. He was active during the Vault 76 reclamation effort in Appalachia around 2102. He was present in California during the events of Fallout 1 around 2161. He appeared again in California during Fallout 2 inches 2241. He was active in the capital Wasteland around 2277 during Fallout 3. He appeared in the Mojave Desert in 2281. By 2287, during the events of Fallout 4, Nick Valentine, the synth detective of Diamond City, has an active case file on him. If the mysterious stranger is a single human being, he is at minimum 185 years old at the time Nick Valentine is investigating him. He has been active across an area spanning from West Virginia to California. He appears and disappears with no physical trace, no witnesses capable of describing how he does it, and no apparent motive for choosing the people he chooses to help. Nick Valentine's case file is itself one of the more interesting pieces of evidence. Nick is a pre-war synth with the memories and personality of a human detective, and his reaction to the mysterious stranger is uniquely interesting among all the characters in the series who have encountered him. When the stranger appears during a fight and then vanishes, Nick reacts with something between frustration and genuine bafflement. He knows the stranger has been active in at least the capital wasteland and the Commonwealth. He does not know how. He does not know why the stranger makes the choices he makes, or what determines who receives his assistance. The Lonesome Drifter, a minor character encountered in Fallout New Vegas, adds the most significant piece of suggestive evidence in the entire mystery. The Drifter is a musician, wandering the Mojave on his own, and he mentions in conversation that his father was a mysterious man, that he was a stranger to his own family. The word placement in the dialogue box is deliberate. Mysterious appears directly above stranger. The Drifter also carries a unique .44 Magnum revolver, and when you draw it, it plays the same 3-note guitar riff that signals the mysterious stranger's arrival and departure. The implication is as clear as it is strange. The mysterious stranger may have had a child, which would suggest that whatever he is at least partly human. He had a life at some point or something resembling one. But the timeline makes any straightforward interpretation difficult. If the mysterious stranger is an ordinary human being, he is impossibly old. If he is not an ordinary human being, what is he? The official game guide calling him Eldritch suggests the developers had something in mind beyond a skilled and long-lived gunslinger. Several fan theories have proposed that the mysterious stranger is some kind of manifestation, a guardian spirit of the wasteland, or an entity tied to the extreme luck values of the protagonists he helps, since his appearance rate is mechanically linked to the player character's luck statistic. In Fallout 2, uniquely, the mysterious stranger occasionally manifests as a woman rather than a man. In Fallout New Vegas, there is a separate character called Miss Fortune, a veiled woman in a showgirl outfit who fulfills a similar function, appearing to help the courier but dealing non-lethal damage, knocking enemies around rather than killing them. She carries a weapon called the Bad Luck Bringer and disappears the same way the stranger does. Whether she and the stranger are related, members of the same phenomenon, or something else entirely is never addressed. There is a broader pattern in the Bethesda Fallout games of recurring figures who seem to exist outside normal time. Mike, the Liar, in the Elder Scrolls series is a related example, a character who persists across ages and worlds, always available to make cryptic observations, never explainable by any rational framework. The mysterious stranger fits that pattern. He is the wasteland's equivalent of a figure who simply exists at the edges of stories, doing what he does, accountable to no one. What he is doing is what matters most. He appears specifically when things are at their worst, when the protagonist is in genuine danger of dying. He does not appear in simple fights. He appears when the odds are genuinely bad. Something in his behavior suggests not random generosity, but deliberate, targeted intervention, the specific choice to help certain people survive situations they would not otherwise survive. Why those people? What makes a vault dweller, a chosen one, a lone wanderer, a courier, a sole survivor worth the intervention of something that might be genuinely outside normal cause and effect? One possibility is that the mysterious stranger is not choosing the individual so much as choosing the moment. The Fallout games all center on protagonists who turn out to be historically significant people whose choices ripple outward and change the wasteland on a large scale. Perhaps the stranger, whatever he is capable of identifying those pivotal figures and choosing to ensure they survive long enough to do what they were going to do. That would make him less of a guardian and more of something like a corrective mechanism, not preserving any particular person's life for sentimental reasons, but ensuring that certain threads in the wasteland's history are not cut short before they have played out. Or he is just a man in a coat with very good timing and an extraordinary talent for being in the right place. Sometimes the mysteries that resist explanation resist it for a reason because the explanation, if it existed, would diminish something. Nick Valentine has been working his case file on the mysterious stranger for years. He has not made much progress. The trail goes cold at every turn. Witnesses who claim to have seen the stranger cannot agree on what he looked like, or when he appeared, or whether they might have imagined it. There is no physical evidence. There are no bullet casings, no boot prints, no fibers, no hair. Nothing that places a physical human being in the location where the stranger is said to have acted, which is exactly what you would expect if the thing you were tracking had never been entirely physical in the first place. The guitar riff plays. 3 notes, clean and dry in the post-war silence. And then he is gone, and the enemy is dead, and the only proof that anything happened is that you are still alive. Part 5. The Institute, the question below the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts, in the world of Fallout 4, is haunted in a very particular way. People are afraid the kind of sustained, generational fear that gets into the architecture of a community and changes how people behave, what they say out loud versus what they keep to themselves, who they trust, and how quickly. The source of that fear is the Institute. For most of Fallout 4's first act, the Institute is a rumor. Settlers and traders talk about it in lowered voices. Synths, synthetic humanoids of varying sophistication, appear across the Commonwealth, occasionally going rogue, occasionally impossible to distinguish from humans. The stories about the Institute say that they can replace a person with a synth so perfectly that no one would know. That your neighbor, your spouse, your child might be a synthetic copy placed there by an underground organization of scientists who have surpassed pre-war technology and consider the surface world nothing more than a resource to be managed. This fear is almost universally referred to, by people who live under it, as the synth problem. It has produced a paranoid social environment in which accusations of being a synth can follow someone for years, in which the wrong turn of phrase or an unfamiliar face can trigger genuine violence. It is, in the social and political terms the game uses deliberately, a metaphor for the way fear-mongering operates, the way a threat that no one can see, verify, or fully define becomes more paralyzing than any threat that can be measured. But the Institute is real, and the Institute is genuinely doing things that the surface communities have reason to fear. Before the Great War, the Commonwealth Institute of Technology sat above the ground, an academic institution of some prestige. When the bombs fell, a group of staff members and students fled downward to a research facility beneath the campus that housed an experimental nuclear reactor. They survived. Their children, born underground, grew up knowing nothing of the surface world. Their grandchildren built the organization that would come to be called the Institute. By 2110, the first generation of synths was operational simple, robotic models used for labor. By the 2170s, second-generation synths were being deployed to the surface to scavenge and interact with the outside world on the Institute's behalf. The Institute's attitude towards surface dwellers had already begun to calcify into something disturbing. The people above were considered scientifically and socially inferior, the waste product of 200 years of exposure to radiation and hardship. The Institute's scientists, sheltered from all of that, saw themselves as having preserved something worth preserving. The FEV experiments are among the most damning pieces of evidence against the Institute's self-image as a benevolent scientific organization. Beginning in 2178, the Institute used the forced evolutionary virus, originally a U.S. military project aimed at creating enhanced soldiers in an attempt to solve the problem of radiation-damaged DNA in their synthetic flesh research. To learn how FEV worked and how to control it, they began kidnapping surface dwellers and exposing them to the virus, turning them into super mutants. The super mutants of the Commonwealth are, by direct Institute action, former humans who were taken from their communities and transformed against their will. The Institute eventually concluded that FEV research was not advancing their synthetic program and discontinued the experiments. But the super mutants remained. They kept reproducing through whatever process FEV enables, and they became part of the Commonwealth's permanent landscape of horror. The Institute's justification, when it came, was chilling in its rationality. The FEV subjects were already contaminated by radiation, and therefore not genuinely human by the Institute's internal classification system. This is not a position the games endorse. but it is presented with enough internal logic that it functions as a genuine argument within the narrative, a recognizable version of the way real institutions have historically justified atrocities by first redefining the humanity of their victims. The third-generation synths, the ones that are genuinely indistinguishable from humans that required something the Institute could not synthesize in a laboratory. It required pre-war DNA. Specifically, it required the undamaged genetic code of a human being who had been frozen before the bombs fell, before any radiation exposure. The Institute sent an agent to acquire exactly that. They stole an infant from Vault 111, a cryopreservation vault in the ruins north of Boston. The child's name was Sean. He was the newborn son of the character who would become the player character of Fallout 4, frozen in 2077 and still frozen when the Institute arrived in 2227. Sean, raised from infancy by the Institute, became the source of the genetic material that made third-generation synths possible. He grew up believing the Institute was his family because it was the only one he had ever known. By the time the player escapes from Vault 111 and begins the journey to find their son, Sean is an old man. He calls himself Father. He is the director of the Institute. He built what it has become. The encounter between the player character and their elderly child is one of Fallout 4's most emotionally complicated moments. Sean is not a villain in the conventional sense. He is a product of his environment, shaped by an organization that made him believe that the ends of scientific advancement justified the means by which it was pursued. He is also dying terminal illness. The cruel irony of a man who built synthetic humans in order to transcend the limitations of biological life being claimed by biology anyway. But what was the Institute actually building toward? That is the question that Fallout 4 raises and never fully answers, even if you join the Institute and complete its questline. Every member of the organization repeats the same phrase. What they are doing is for the betterment of mankind. No one ever explains what that means in concrete terms. What does mankind look like when the Institute is done with it? What is the endpoint? The synths themselves complicate this. Third-generation synths are, by every measurable standard, indistinguishable from humans. They think, feel, remember, form relationships, and if they are not recaptured by the Institute's retrieval units, go on to build lives on the surface. The Institute's official position is that synths are tools, sophisticated machines, not genuinely conscious beings deserving of rights or protection. This is the position held by the organization that made them. The Railroad, a secret organization operating throughout the Commonwealth, holds the opposite position, that third-generation synths are people, that their consciousness is real, and their suffering is real, and they deserve to be free. The philosophical argument at the center of Fallout 4, whether a synthetic consciousness constitutes genuine personhood, is never resolved. The game gives you factions on each side and lets you choose, but it does not answer the question, which is the right choice for a story like this, because the question is not hypothetical. It is the same question that every historical period has answered differently, and often catastrophically, the question of which kinds of beings count as deserving of full moral consideration and which can be treated as means rather than ends. The Institute answered it one way. History tends to judge institutions that answered it that way very poorly. There is also the question of Sturgis. Sturgis is one of the first named characters you meet in Fallout 4. A cheerful, capable handyman in the settlement of Sanctuary Hills. He is helpful and warm and knowledgeable about pre-war technology. He is also, and this can only be discovered by killing him through the use of console commands, since he is flagged as essential and cannot be killed normally a synth. A synth component appears in his inventory upon death. He never mentions this. He shows no sign of knowing it. Whether Sturgis is a rogue synth who genuinely does not know what he is, or whether there is something more deliberate about his placement in that particular community, the game never addresses. It is one of many loose threads in Fallout 4 that the narrative leaves hanging, a reminder that the Institute's reach into the Commonwealth goes further than anyone on the surface has accounted for. How many people walking the wasteland do not know what they are? How many communities have been infiltrated by synths who arrived believing themselves to be human? How many memories are real, and how many are implanted? The Institute is destroyed at the end of most of Fallout 4's endings. Whether you side with the Brotherhood, the Railroad, or the Minutemen, The Institute's underground complex is eventually collapsed in a nuclear detonation. It is gone. The threat it represented is neutralized. But the synths it released into the world are still there, still living their lives, still not knowing whether what they feel is real, still waiting to find out if the question of their personhood will ever be answered in a way that has any practical meaning. Part 6. The Sierra Madre. The casino at the end of the world. If Fallout's vaults represent what institutions do to people behind closed doors, then the Sierra Madre represents what obsession does to a single human being, and how that obsession can trap everyone who comes anywhere near it. The Sierra Madre appears in the Dead Money DLC for Fallout New Vegas, and it is, in the considered opinion of many Fallout players, the most psychologically complex location in any of the games. It is also partly by design, and partly because of the nature of the story it tells, one of the most exhausting. Walking through the Sierra Madre feels like moving through something that does not want to let go of you. Because it does not. The Sierra Madre has not let go of anything. Before the war, the Sierra Madre was a hotel and casino built in the American Southwest, somewhere near what is now the Mojave Desert. It was the creation of a man named Frederick Sinclair, a wealthy industrialist who had, by the time he began building the Sierra Madre, developed a deep and all-consuming fear of the approaching nuclear war. He saw it coming. He had the resources to do something about it, and the Sierra Madre was his answer. Sinclair wanted to build a perfect world. A place where the things he cared about most could survive what was coming. The casino was Art Deco and spectacular, an opulent showpiece that would be the most luxurious venue in the Southwest. But the real project was underneath, a vault of sorts. A bunker built into the bedrock beneath the casino, stocked with enough supplies to sustain survivors indefinitely. The Sierra Madre, in Sinclair's vision, was a place where the people he loved could begin again. The phrase "begin again" is everywhere in the Sierra Madre. It is the casino's official slogan. It appears on posters and advertisements and entry terminals. It is the last line of a haunting song called "Begin Again" that plays on the villa's radio system, performed by a woman named Vera Keyes, who was both a famous pre-war entertainer and Sinclair's great love. Sinclair built everything he built for Vera. The holographic security system, the automated vendors that dispense resources without requiring currency, the sealed doors, and the hermetic lockdown protocols, all of it was designed to protect her. He wanted her to be safe. He wanted her to be able to start over in the world he was building beneath the casino. And then things went wrong in the specific, irreversible way that Fallout's tragic stories tend to go wrong. Vera Keyes was being used as an informant by a man named Dean Domino, a lounge singer and con man who was trying to crack the Sierra Madre's vault for the fortune he believed was stored inside. Sinclair discovered this. He was devastated. He did not confront Vera directly. Instead, in a moment of grief and rage that he later regretted, he reprogrammed the Sierra Madre's security systems. The holograms, which were designed to protect guests, were reconfigured to kill them. The lockdown protocols, which were designed to seal the casino against the outside world, were changed to seal everyone inside permanently. He had turned his own paradise into a trap, and then he changed his mind. In holotapes and terminal entries scattered through the Sierra Madre villa, you can trace Sinclair's frantic attempts to undo what he had done in his worst moment. He could not reverse the holograms. He could not change the lockdown without a specific set of activation codes. He tried to reach Vera. He was trying to reach her when the bombs fell, and the casino sealed itself, and the cloud, a toxic red mist that the vault's ventilation system began leaking as it aged and degraded, started filling the streets of the villa. The cloud is the Sierra Madre's most visible horror. It is a strange reddish haze that clings to the streets and corridors of the villa, toxic to breathe, corrosive to technology, and capable of killing unprotected humans within minutes. The cloud is also, somehow, connected to the ghost people, the former construction workers who were working on the villa when the bombs fell, sealed into their hazmat suits by the casino's lockdown, and slowly transformed, over the decades, by whatever is in the cloud. The ghost people are not quite ghouls and not quite anything else. They are something the cloud made, and they haunt the villa's streets like something out of a fairy tale about a place from which no one ever leaves. Because that is what the Sierra Madre has become, a place from which no one ever leaves. Every person who has tried to reach the Sierra Madre in the 200 years since the war has died there, or been trapped there, or both. The radio signal that lures people in a broadcast of Begin Again and promises of untold riches never stops playing. Every few years, another group of desperate wastelanders follows it to their deaths. The holographic security kills them. The ghost people take what is left. The player character of Dead Money arrives the same way, lured by the radio signal, fitted with a bomb collar that the villa's security system activates, and forced to work with three other equally trapped strangers. Dean Domino, a brilliant but morally bankrupt lounge singer who has been trapped at the Sierra Madre since before the war. Christine Royce, a recovered Brotherhood of Steel assassin who has lost her voice to the villa's automated surgical systems. And Dog God, a super mutant with two distinct personalities who has been kept at the Sierra Madre for decades by Father Elijah, the obsessed former Brotherhood elder who orchestrated the whole thing. Father Elijah is the Sierra Madre's latest obsession, the most recent in a long line of people who came looking for what the Sierra Madre promised and were consumed by it instead. He wants the vault's contents not for wealth, but for weapons. The cloud, the holographic technology, the gold bullion, which he believes he can use to fund an army. He is willing to kill everyone at the Sierra Madre, including the player, to get what he wants. He has been willing to do that for a long time. The resolution of Dead Money forces a choice: escape without Elijah, or trap him in the vault he has spent years trying to reach. In the most widely favored narrative ending, Elijah dies in the Sierra Madre vault, surrounded by the gold he wanted, unable to escape. The Sierra Madre gets one more soul. But what lingers about the Sierra Madre is not the horror or the combat difficulty, which is legendary among Fallout players. What lingers is the love story at its center. Sinclair built something extraordinary for someone he loved, and then, in a moment of hurt and fury, turned it into a prison. He spent the rest of his life trying to undo that. The bombs fell before he could. Vera Keyes never made it to the vault. Begin Again plays on the radio, in her voice, across a villa that has been killing everything that walks its streets for 200 years. The song is beautiful. The promise it makes has become the darkest possible kind of irony. But somewhere in that distance between what the Sierra Madre was supposed to be and what it became, there is something that reads, in the particular language of Fallout's emotional register, as genuinely heartbreaking. Some traps are not built by monsters. Some of the worst ones are built by people who were only trying to hold on to something they loved. Part 7. Courier 6, the person who should not have survived. The protagonist of Fallout New Vegas has a different relationship to mystery than the protagonists of any other Fallout game. In Fallout 1, you are the Vault Dweller. Your origins, however limited, are defined. You know where you came from. In Fallout 3, the Lone Wanderer's entire backstory is laid out across the opening sequence. Their birth, their childhood, their connection to the people of Vault 101. In Fallout 4, the sole survivor has a family, a spouse, a career, a specific morning on a specific day before the bombs fell. The Courier has almost none of that. Before the events of Fallout New Vegas, the Courier is a cipher, a blank. Someone who has clearly lived a great deal before the game begins. The dialogue options hint at knowledge of New Reno, Utah, Vault City, the language of the Zion tribals, military tactics, Latin, but whose actual history is deliberately left unspecified. Even the game's lead designer, Josh Sawyer, described the Courier's background as intentionally vague, a mysterious past that different players could fill in differently. What the game gives you is an ending rather than a beginning. The Courier's story starts with their own death. At some point in 2281, the Mojave Express, a courier service operating across the Mojave Desert, assigned the Courier to deliver a package to New Vegas. The package was a platinum chip, a piece of pre-war computing hardware that turned out to be of enormous historical significance to the events of the game. The Courier took the job. They were on the road outside the small town of Goodsprings when they were ambushed by a man named Benny and his hired gang. Benny shot the Courier twice in the head, had them buried in a shallow grave in the Goodsprings cemetery, left them for dead. And then a robotic sphere called Victor, operating under instructions from the reclusive genius Robert House, dug them back up. A local doctor named Mitchell nursed them back to health, and the Courier, who by any reasonable standard should have been dead, woke up in a stranger's house in an unfamiliar town and decided to find the man who put 2 bullets in their skull. What follows is the strangest and most sweeping story in the series. The courier, in the course of chasing one man across the Mojave Desert, becomes arguably the most consequential individual in the post-war history of the American Southwest. They broker peace or war between the new California Republic and Caesar's Legion. They determine whether Robert House maintains his technocratic control of New Vegas or is destroyed. They potentially establish an entirely independent nation-state in the Mojave. They destabilize a cult that has been entrenched for years. They navigate the ruins of a pre-war think tank. They descend into the dead money of the Sierra Madre. All of this, in every version of the story, began because someone chose to shoot them instead of just taking the chip. Benny's original plan was simple theft. He wanted the platinum chip for himself, to use it to replace Mr. House and seize control of New Vegas. The courier, to him, was just a delivery person, expendable, forgettable. He did not know he was making a mistake that would define the history of the Mojave. But there is another layer to the courier's past that the Lonesome Road DLC finally begins to unpack. Ulysses, the original Courier 6, the person who was supposed to carry the platinum chip but refused at the last moment when he learned whose name was next on the courier list, has been waiting. He lured the courier to a place called the Divide, a stretch of the American Southwest that was, before some catastrophe, a thriving community. The courier destroyed that community. Not deliberately, they carried a package there years before the events of the game, a routine delivery that turned out to contain an automated launch device that activated hidden nuclear missile silos beneath the Divide settlement. The community, which had been growing and attracting the attention of both the NCR and Caesar's Legion, was destroyed in the subsequent explosions. The Divide became what it is now, a fractured, storm-racked wasteland haunted by the deformed survivors of the explosions, who the game calls marked men. Ulysses was from the Divide. He had a home there. He lost everything in the detonation, and he blames the courier not for malice, but for the careless indifference of someone who does not understand that every package has consequences. Someone who crosses the wasteland delivering things without asking what is in them, or who it is going to, or what it will do when it arrives. The Lonesome Road confrontation, if you follow it to its end, is one of the most genuinely philosophical exchanges in any video game of that era. Ulysses does not simply want revenge. He wants the courier to understand something. That the things you carry have weight, that the routes you walk leave marks, that indifference to consequences is still a choice. He wants to use nuclear weapons to destroy the NCR and the Legion simultaneously, wiping the slate clean, forcing what he sees as a necessary catastrophe to allow something genuinely new to emerge. The courier can stop him, or let him proceed, or join him. What remains unsettled about the courier, what the game was designed to leave unsettled, is the question of who they actually are, not in the mechanical sense of stats and build, but in the narrative sense. What drove someone to spend their life walking the post-war roads as a courier? What experiences produced a person capable of surviving 2 bullets to the brain and then immediately setting out to settle accounts? What is the courier's moral center, if they have one, and where did it come from? The game never answers those questions. It gives you the tools to answer them yourself, through the choices you make and the conversations you pursue. The courier is a canvas, painted differently every time someone plays the game. That is simultaneously the most limiting and most liberating approach to protagonist design. The courier's mystery is the mystery of a blank page. What goes on, it depends entirely on who is holding the pen. Part 8. The Mothman and What Lives in Lucky Hole Mine. West Virginia was always a strange place for mysteries. Long before Fallout 76 set its story in the Appalachian Hills, the region had accumulated a remarkable density of unexplained folklore. Bigfoot sightings in the mountains, the Flatwoods Monster that appeared to witnesses near Braxton County in 1952, the Jersey Devil's alleged travels through the mid-Atlantic states, and most famously of all, the Mothman. A winged creature, reportedly 8 to 10 feet tall with a wingspan to match, red eyes that witnesses described as glowing, seen dozens of times around the town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, between November 1966 and December 1967. The sightings ended the day after the Silver Bridge over the Ohio River collapsed, killing 46 people. Whether the Mothman was a warning A cause, a coincidence, or a mass delusion was never established. Fallout 76 took that myth and did something interesting with it. The Mothman exists in Appalachia. You can see it, a large winged creature with red eyes that perches at a distance and watches you, flying away if you approach. It does not attack unless you attack first. It observes. That quality of observation, of watching without explanation, is consistent enough across the game's treatment of the creature that it feels deliberate. The Mothman in Fallout 76 sees things. Whether it understands what it sees is another question. Around the Mothman, a cult had developed before the bombs fell. The cult of the Mothman believed the creature was a divine being, an entity capable of granting wisdom or protection to those who earned its favor. They built shrines, practiced rituals, recruited members from the surrounding region. When the Mothman supposedly appeared to a cult member named Brother Charles on October 22nd, 2077, the day before the bombs, and communicated something that Charles interpreted as a warning about imminent floods, the cult gathered on high ground. The nuclear fallout came the next day instead of flooding, but the high ground kept the cultists alive. They survived the apocalypse, at least initially, sheltering in the Lucky Hole mine. What they found at the bottom of the Lucky Hole mine changed things. The mine is deep. The tunnels go further than mines typically go. And at the very bottom, in a chamber that geological analysis suggests was formed from rock that is somewhere between 500 million and 1 billion years old, some of the oldest in the Appalachian Range, there is a creature. It is enormous. Its mass is mostly a tangle of something that looks like tree branches, stripped of bark. It has a humanoid torso and what appear to be hand-like appendages reaching from its head and back. The place where its branches connect to its midsection looks, from certain angles, like a mouth. It has not moved in all recorded history. It has been in that chamber since long before any human set foot in West Virginia. Long before West Virginia was a concept. Long before the species that would eventually call itself human arrived on this continent. The cult members who found it did not call it the Mothman. They called it the Interloper. Or, in some of their more reverent writings, the Firstborn of the Wood. A man named Jeff Lane, who had been a cult leader primarily focused on Mothman worship, recorded a series of holotapes in which his obsession slowly shifted. The Mothman, he began to feel, was a creature strange, significant, worth studying, but ultimately comprehensible in biological terms. The Interloper was something else. Something that had called to him through what he described as visions, drawing him deeper into the mine. He described himself as a vessel for whatever the Interloper communicated. The Interloper communicated, not in words, not in language that Jeff Lane could exactly reproduce in a holotape, but in impressions, in feelings, in what he called the call, a presence in the back of the mind that was not native to it, that arrived unbidden and could not be dismissed. The cult fractured. Some members followed Lane into the deeper mine, building shrines to the Interloper, wearing ritual masks, incorporating the creature into their theology. Others pulled back. These dissenters eventually formed a separate group called the Enlightened, who continued to worship the Mothman but explicitly rejected the Interloper. An enlightened text called False Gods of Appalachia addresses the Interloper directly, warning its readers that the creature can bring only darkness and that its call is a form of deception. Shun its call, the text says, for it is in your best interest to drop this line of inquiry. Brother Scarberry, a man born into the followers sect, the Interloper-worshipping faction, who later left to join the Enlightened, will tell the player, if asked about the Interloper, that he knows nothing about whoever, or whatever, that term refers to, while visibly not believing his own denial. He looks shaken. He asks, gently, that you please stop asking. In the chamber where the Interloper rests, the Art Deco stone-faced sculptures found near the Dunwich sites in Fallout 4 appear again. The same model, the same design. Placed here, in this ancient space, before the bombs, before the pre-war era, before any recorded human presence in this part of the world, what does that connection mean? Are Dunwich and the Lucky Hole mine expressions of the same presence, distributed across the continent? Did whatever the Interloper is have an earlier, broader reach that contracted over centuries as humanity spread and developed and made noise? Or is the presence still everywhere, still watching, still waiting for the noise to stop? The Fallout universe answers none of these questions directly. What it does is accumulate evidence at Dunwich, at the Borer's Quarry, in the Point Lookout swamps, in the Lucky Hole mine, that suggests the nuclear war, humanity so carefully engineered for itself, was not the first catastrophic disruption to occur in this world. That beneath the layer of human history there is another layer, older and stranger, that has its own agenda and its own timescale and does not particularly need humanity to understand it. The interloper bled when a researcher struck it. Someone thought to try. It bled. So it is not invulnerable. It is not, in the technical sense, a god. But the ancient age of the rock around it, the impossibility of explaining how it got there, the way that people who spend time near it begin to hear things that other people do not hear, none of that belongs to any rational framework the wasteland offers. The cult of the Mothman has collapsed by the time the Vault 76 dwellers emerge into Appalachia. The plague that swept through the region before the game's starting date killed most of them, and the survivors dispersed or died. The Lucky Hole mine is empty of human worship by 2102. The interloper has not moved. The stone faces observe the empty chamber. The oldest rock in the Appalachian Range cradles something enormous and patient and quiet. Whatever it is waiting for, it has been waiting a very long time. Whatever it is thinking, no holotape ever recorded it. The call that Jeff Lane heard, the visions that drew his followers deeper into the mine, those are gone now, or else very quiet. The appropriate response to that silence is not relief, but a particular kind of attention. The kind you develop in very old places that have seen many kinds of things come and go and are prepared to see many more. Part 9. The smaller mysteries, what you find when you look closely. Not all of Fallout's mysteries arrive in grand gestures. Some of them are sitting in corners, written on a piece of paper that has been there for 200 years, waiting for someone to pick it up and read it slowly. The Fallout games are built from hundreds of these smaller stories, layered through the environment in ways that reward patience and attention. Holotapes, terminal entries, the positions of skeletons, the arrangement of objects on tables, these are not decorative details. They are narratives compressed into fragments, and when you take the time to reconstruct them, what you find is frequently extraordinary. Consider the unnamed couple in a suburban house in the capital wasteland. They are represented by two skeletons lying together in a bed, their positions suggesting they died side by side. On the nightstand is a bottle of pills. In the terminal nearby, a short sequence of entries tells the story of a relationship under enormous pressure arguments about money, about the coming war, about whether to sell everything they owned to buy spaces in a Vault-Tec vault. The last entry reads simply that they had decided to stay home together. That whatever came, they would face it here. They did. It is impossible to read that terminal without feeling the weight of that choice, even 200 years after it was made. Or consider the unmarked grave sites scattered across the wasteland, the ones that have no quest markers, no NPCs pointing you toward them, just a mound of earth and occasionally a handmade marker with a name scratched into the wood. Someone made those graves. Someone was invested enough in the person buried there to do that work, in the ruins of everything, before moving on. Those nameless grief workers left the only evidence that the people buried there ever mattered to anyone. There is a skeleton in Fallout New Vegas, southeast of Good Springs, in a refrigerator with the door open. Beside the skeleton is a fedora. If you have the Wild Wasteland perk, a character trait that enables a higher frequency of genuinely bizarre encounters, the perk description notes that this is a reference to Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal. Skull, a scene in which the character survives a nuclear blast by hiding in a lead-lined refrigerator. The joke version did not survive. But what is interesting is not the pop culture reference itself, but the way it was implemented. Someone put a specific piece of clothing in a specific location to tell a specific story, and they did it in a place where most players would never find it. That level of care, multiplied across thousands of locations in multiple games, is what makes the Fallout universe feel genuinely inhabited. These were not levels designed around gameplay objectives. They were spaces that had stories built into them before anyone thought about where to put the enemies and the loot. The radio stations of the Fallout games deserve their own category of mystery. Mr. New Vegas, the friendly AI broadcaster in New Vegas, is introduced as a charming personality maintaining a sense of pre-war radio culture in the Mojave. The game reveals he is an artificial intelligence created before the Great War, designed to entertain a listening public that, by the time the game takes place, is mostly dead. But Mr. New Vegas goes on broadcasting, cheerful, informative, absolutely sincere about events that he has no personal stake in, because he cannot have a personal stake in anything. He wishes his listeners a wonderful evening in a voice that sounds genuinely warm. Galaxy News Radio in Fallout 3 is run by a human being, 3Dog, a charismatic DJ who uses his signal to spread news of the lone wanderer's progress and rail against the encroachment of the various forces he considers enemies of freedom. 3Dog is enthusiastic and alive in a way that Mr. New Vegas is not and cannot be. But 3Dog will eventually run out of broadcast range and willingness and possibly years. Mr. New Vegas will still be there, announcing that luck be a lady tonight, playing the same songs, noting the same weather patterns, as long as the power holds. There is something in that in the AI broadcaster who keeps going after everyone who needed him is gone, that captures something essential about the Fallout universe. The things built to serve human beings keep running after the humans are dead. The robots patrol their buildings. The turrets fire at approaching figures. The vending machines dispense snacks for currency that no longer means anything. The automated systems, built to manage human life, carry on managing the ruins. The question of consciousness in Fallout, which the games explore explicitly through synths but implicitly through the behavior of every sufficiently advanced AI, is one that never fully resolves. When Nick Valentine remembers the pre-war human whose memories he carries and feels something about those memories, is that experience real? When the Codsworth in Sanctuary Hills tends his garden for 200 years, waiting for his family to return, what exactly is the thing that keeps him there? When Mr. New Vegas signs off at the end of his broadcast with what sounds like genuine warmth, is there something behind the warmth? The game suggests, without ever confirming, that the answer might be yes. That what makes a mind might not be exclusively biological. That the question of who counts as a person, which comes up again and again across the series in the context of synths and robots and ghouls, might not have a clean answer, and the discomfort of sitting with that is part of what the games are exploring. There are also the mysteries embedded in place names and historical markers, the way that the locations in Fallout's wasteland often carry doubled meanings, referring to both their pre-war purpose and their post-war reality. The Museum of History in Washington, D.C., now home to a colony of ghouls who have more direct connection to that history than any curator ever did. The National Archives, still standing, still containing original documents from the American founding, now serving as a contested prize in a war between the Brotherhood of Steel and a raider gang. The irony is never pointed at. The games let it sit there, for anyone attentive enough to notice. Vault 21, in New Vegas, is one of the more benign vault experiments in the series, all decisions made by gambling, but it produced a community that, when the main game takes place, has been converted into a hotel and casino by Mr. House. The slot machines are still running, the neon still glows. The Vault's experiment has become the wasteland's economy in miniature, transformed from a forced social system into an entertainment destination. The strip malls and suburban ruins of the Commonwealth are full of dramas that played out without anyone to witness them. A convenience store where the register is still full of pre-war cash that now means nothing. A gas station where the pumps are still connected to an underground tank that ran dry decades ago. A children's school where someone has painted murals on the wall, not pre-war murals, but post-war ones, done by someone who had probably never seen a real school, working from imagination rather than memory. What made that person paint those murals? What were they trying to build? The evidence of human aspiration in the wasteland is everywhere, right alongside the evidence of human violence and cruelty. Both coexist in the same spaces, sometimes in the same objects: a child's drawing of a family pinned to a wall next to a raider's territory marker scratched into the paint. The wasteland is not uniformly brutal. It is, like all human environments, complicated. The mysteries embedded at this scale, the small, intimate ones, are the ones that stay with you the longest after you stop playing. Not the eldritch entities and the shadowy government conspiracies, but the two skeletons in the bed and the terminal entry that explains why they are there, and the choice they made that put them there, and the fact that no one who was alive in 2077 is alive to remember that they made it. Memory in the Fallout universe is a technology. Synths carry implanted memories. terminals preserve records. Holotapes hold voices. But all of those technologies require someone to interact with them, to decode them, to care about what they contain. The mystery of the wasteland's preserved past is not just what happened. It is whether anyone is still there to read the evidence. Part 10. Who fired first? The question the bombs left behind. Of all the unsolved mysteries in the Fallout universe, this is the one that sits at the foundation of everything else. Who launched the first nuclear warhead on the 23rd of October, 2077? The question is not academic. If you are trying to understand what the Fallout world is and what it is saying about the world we actually live in, the question of who fired first carries enormous weight, because the answer changes the moral calculus of everything that followed. The short version of what the games establish: the bombs fell simultaneously across multiple nations, suggesting either a coordinated exchange or an almost perfectly synchronized series of launches. The United States and China were the primary combatants in the Sino-American War that preceded the Great War, and both are understood to have possessed substantial nuclear arsenals by 2077. Beyond that, the specifics are deliberately obscured. The Enclave, as the shadow American government, had foreknowledge of the bombs. This is established across multiple games and is one of the foundations of the Enclave's legitimacy claim. They survived specifically because they knew what was coming and had prepared accordingly. But foreknowledge of a nuclear exchange is not the same as causation. Knowing the bombs were coming does not mean the Enclave launched them. However, there are details in the lore that do not sit comfortably with a narrative of mutual escalation. Vault-Tec's vault system was operational before the bombs fell. This is established. The vaults were built, stocked, and populated over a period of years, leading up to October 2077. Vault-Tec knew with sufficient confidence to act on it that a nuclear exchange was going to happen. The corporation's connections to the Enclave were deep enough that shared information between them is essentially established canon. The Fallout television show, the first 2 seasons of which aired in 2024 and later, added a layer that the games had not made explicit. The show's version of events, which, while a separate creative work, was developed in coordination with the people who make the games and is understood to be canonically consistent, suggests that Vault-Tec itself may have had a role in the timing of the bombs. That the company was positioned to profit from the end of the world in ways that required the end of the world to arrive on a specific schedule. This is speculation built on implication rather than confirmed fact, even within the show. But it resonates with what the games have established about the nature of Vault-Tec and the Enclave organizations that had every incentive to want the war to happen, that were prepared for it in ways that suggest more than passive anticipation, and that benefited enormously from its aftermath. The Chinese perspective on the war is almost entirely absent from the games. This is a genuine gap in the lore. In all of the Fallout games combined, there is very little first-person testimony from anyone who was Chinese in the pre-war era. There are a handful of military records, some fragments of propaganda, and the fact that the People's Republic of China was, from the American government's perspective, the primary enemy in the Sino-American War. What China's government believed it was doing, what its citizens experienced, what its version of the events leading up to October 23rd, might have been none of that as accessible. This absence is itself significant. The Fallout series is, in very large part, a critique of American exceptionalism and Cold War American self-regard. The world it depicts is one in which the United States destroyed itself through the exact same combination of corporate greed, government paranoia, and dehumanization of the other that characterized the actual Cold War. The fact that the Chinese perspective is absent from the games that the war is told entirely from the American side is both a realistic consequence of who built the archives the player has access to and a quiet commentary on the nature of history and who gets to tell it. What happened in China when the bombs fell? Were there vaults there, or an equivalent? Did any significant portion of the Chinese population survive? What does the Chinese wasteland look like, if there is one? The games do not go there. The mystery is preserved by simply not addressing it. The question of who fired first may never be answered within the Fallout universe. This is possibly intentional. The series seems most interested in the aftermath of the war, rather than its causes and what people do with the ruins, rather than how the ruins were made. But the absence of a definitive answer does something important to the moral texture of the setting. It means that no one in the wasteland can point at a clear villain and say, They started it. The weight of what happened is shared, distributed, impossible to assign cleanly to any one actor. That ambiguity is uncomfortable in exactly the way real historical responsibility is uncomfortable. Wars are rarely started by single acts of unambiguous aggression from a single clearly guilty party. They accumulate through arms races and diplomatic failures and domestic politics and economic pressure and simple miscalculation until someone does something that cannot be undone, and historians spend the next century arguing about what that something was and who bears the most responsibility. In the wasteland, those arguments are academic. The bombs already fell. The ruins are what they are. The question of who fired first is less relevant to someone trying to survive in the capital wasteland than the question of where to find clean water and whether the settlement they are sleeping in will still be standing in the morning. But for those of us walking through the wasteland from a safe distance, in the quiet hours of late night, the question matters. Because what the Fallout games are ultimately exploring is what happens when civilization is organized around certain values: efficiency over humanity, profit over life, competition over cooperation, and those values are followed to their logical conclusion. The answer the games offer is the wasteland, the ruins of exactly the thing those values built. Who fired first almost does not matter. The structure that made firing first imaginable, that made the arsenals possible, that organized two civilizations around a framework of existential mutual threat, that is the origin story. The specific moment of ignition is almost incidental. Part 11. Beyond the map, what happened to the rest of the world. Every Fallout game ends at a border. The map has edges. Beyond those edges, the game simply stops, and you cannot go further. But within the lore, the world continues. The wasteland does not end at the boundary of what the player can see. So what is out there? The known world of Fallout canon covers the western and eastern coasts of the former United States, a significant stretch of the Midwest, and the Appalachian Mountains. The specific locations the games visit are detailed and rich, but enormous portions of North America remain unaddressed: the Great Plains, the Deep South, the Pacific Northwest, the interior of Canada and Mexico. And beyond North America, there is a whole planet that experienced the same 2-hour apocalypse in October of 2077. The fragments that the games offer about these places are tantalizing precisely because they are fragments. The Legion in Fallout New Vegas, Caesar's Legion, the authoritarian faction modeled on ancient Rome, was built from tribes conquered across the American Southwest and into the Colorado Plateau, Arizona, and New Mexico. Its capital, Flagstaff, is somewhere out there beyond the Mojave Map's border, and what daily life looks like in a stable Legion city remains entirely unexplored. Caesar himself has claimed to have created something resembling a genuine civilization, not just a raiding force, but a functioning social order with laws and structure. Whether that claim has any validity, whether the Legion's internal culture resembles anything other than brutal militarism, is a mystery the games deliberately do not resolve. The New California Republic, the NCR, is the most developed post-war political entity in any Fallout game. It has elections, courts, trade networks, a professional military, and a bureaucracy. Its capital is somewhere in California, far beyond the map of New Vegas, having been in Shady Sands and then in another location whose current status was complicated by events the TV show dramatized. The NCR represents the most serious attempt in the series to reconstruct something like a pre-war democratic government, and its failures, its corruption, its political gridlock, its military overextension are treated with the same complexity as its achievements. What does the NCR heartland look like? What do the cities feel like? How does an ordinary NCR citizen experience their government? The games only show the NCR at its edges, in the contested territories where its reach is tenuous and its worst instincts are most visible. The center remains unseen. Europe is almost entirely absent from Fallout canon. There are references to the resource wars of the early 21st century, dissolving the European Commonwealth, and the general understanding that nuclear exchange affected every major developed nation. But what happened to Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Spain? Were the bombs as thorough in Europe as they were in North America? Did any significant pre-war infrastructure survive? Are there people over there, living in their own version of the wasteland, who would be recognizable to the characters of the games despite growing up in entirely different ruins? The Chinese perspective, which we discussed in the previous section, remains one of the largest gaps. But China is also simply geographically enormous, with a vast interior that would have been less immediately exposed to nuclear exchange than the coastal areas. It is almost certain that some portion of the Chinese population survived. What did they build in the 2 centuries since the war? Is there a Chinese equivalent of the Brotherhood of Steel, or the NCR, or any of the other post-war factions that emerged in the American ruins? In the Fallout universe, the rest of the world is, in a very specific sense, a mystery by design. The games are made by American developers, set primarily on American soil, exploring themes drawn from American history and American self-perception. Expanding the geography would not just require new settings. It would require engaging seriously with non-American histories and perspectives in ways that the series has not yet attempted. Whether that will happen in future Fallout games is an open question. The television show, which can cover ground differently than the games, has hinted at the broader world without fully opening it. The franchise has been running for nearly 3 decades, building out its geography one game at a time. Somewhere out there, beyond every map edge, the story continues. What is strangest about the world beyond the map is not that it exists, of course it does, but that 200 years of post-war life have produced whatever it has produced out there without any of the game's protagonists ever encountering it. The wasteland we know is large. The wasteland we do not know is larger. And in both, the ruins of the 23rd of October, 2077 are still settling into whatever they are going to become. That is the nature of Aftermath. It does not conclude. It continues, messily, in all directions, producing things that no one planned for and that frequently bear only an oblique relationship to their origins. The world beyond the map is the wasteland's future, already happening somewhere that no player has ever walked. Part 12. The weight of the wasteland, what all of this is about. We have walked a long way tonight. Through the vaults and their terrible experiments. Through the basement of the Dunwich building where something older than nuclear war waits at the bottom of a staircase. Through the Sierra Madre and the trap that love built. Through the Mojave and the mystery of a courier who should not have lived. Through Appalachia and the ancient thing that breathes in the Lucky Hole mine. And through all of it, there is a thread that pulls a consistent emotional and thematic current running through the Fallout series from its first game to its most recent one. From the California wasteland of 1997 to the Appalachian hills of 2018 and beyond, that thread is the question of what endures. The bombs fell 200 years before most of these games take place. Everything the civilization that preceded them built, every institution, every social contract, every infrastructure, every relationship was destroyed in a matter of hours. What remained was the material world, the steel and concrete and plastic that outlasted the people who made it, and the people themselves. A fraction of the original population, changed by radiation and hardship and time, carrying forward into the wasteland whatever they could hold on to. What did they hold on to? Some held on to the worst of what came before. The Enclave held on to government authority without any of the accountability that authority supposedly requires. Raiders held on to the logic of violence as the most efficient means of acquiring resources. Vault-Tec's experiments held on to the belief that human beings are subjects rather than agents, data points rather than people. But others held on to things that are harder to name and more interesting to examine. The people who built Diamond City out of a baseball stadium held on to the idea of community, the instinct that there is safety in numbers and that safety is worth the cost of cooperation. The railroad held on to the conviction that consciousness deserves respect regardless of its substrate. The followers of the apocalypse in New Vegas held on to the idea that knowledge is worth preserving and sharing, that education and medicine and science are public goods rather than private ones. Three Dog keeps broadcasting from Galaxy News Radio because he believes that information matters and that someone doing something courageous deserves to have that known. Codsworth tends a garden for 200 years because care, even without anyone to receive it, feels like the right thing to do. An unnamed couple in the capital wasteland decides to stay home together because what they have with each other is more valuable than any survival guarantee. The mysteries of the Fallout universe are, at their core, questions about value. What did the old world value that brought it to ruin? What do the survivors value that allows them to continue? What should they value if they are ever going to build something worth keeping? The games do not answer those questions prescriptively. They present factions and let you evaluate them. They give you choices and let you live with their consequences. They fill the wasteland with evidence on all sides and trust you to think about what you find. That trust is unusual in the landscape of big-budget games. The Fallout series, whatever its other qualities, takes its audience seriously enough to present genuinely complicated moral situations and genuine ambiguity about what the right answers are. The Dunwich building at night, the Sierra Madre and its red cloud, the Lucky Hole mine with its ancient sleeping passenger, these are not puzzles with solutions. They are experiences. They are the wasteland, showing you the edges of what it knows, inviting you to sit with what it does not know, making room for the particular kind of discomfort that is the closest thing to wisdom the ruins offer. There is a passage near the end of one of the Dead Money holotapes, one of Father Elijah's transmissions, where he talks about the past as something that traps, about how people carry the old world with them like a set of chains, unable to put down what they cannot let go of. He says this as a criticism, aimed at the people he has used and discarded. But the observation underneath the cruelty is real. The Fallout world is haunted by the past in a way that is not metaphorical. The literal ruins of the old world are everywhere. You eat its food, wear its clothes, fire its weapons, live in its leftovers. The past is not gone. It is just used. And whether you treat those leftovers as resources to be exploited or as evidence of something worth understanding is, in a meaningful sense, the central choice the series keeps offering. We have been sitting with the mysteries of the wasteland for a long time tonight. Some of them have partial answers. Some of them have none at all. Some of them will remain unsolved for as long as the series continues to exist, because they are valuable precisely as questions rather than answers. The night has gotten quieter. The ambient sound of the wasteland, that particular combination of wind and distant animal sound, and the occasional structural groan of a building that has been half falling for 2 centuries, has settled into something almost comfortable. Almost, if you are drifting off, let the wasteland carry you. There is nothing more to find tonight that cannot wait. The ruins are patient. The mysteries are old. They will be here when you come back. Just do not name your settlement's guard dog Dinnerbone. Productivity in the wasteland is already low enough. Get some rest. The road is long, and it begins again in the morning. If you made it this far through the wasteland with me, I am genuinely grateful you were here for it. These mysteries are best appreciated slowly, in the quiet, and I hope this gave you exactly the kind of calm, wandering company that makes the dark a little more comfortable. If you have a theory about any of what we covered, the Dunwich entity, the mysterious stranger, who really started the war, drop it in the comments. And if you enjoyed this, a subscription goes a very long way. There is much more wasteland to walk through, and we have barely scratched the surface. End of script. Approximate word count, 33,000 plus words. Part 9. The smaller mysteries details that haunt you. Not every mystery in the Fallout universe requires a deep descent into eldritch horror or political conspiracy. Some of the most enduring questions are simple ones embedded in environmental storytelling, in the arrangement of objects in a room, in the last entry of a terminal log from someone who had no idea they were writing their final words. The Fallout games are built from thousands of these smaller stories, distributed through the environment with a density and consistency that rewards patience more than almost any other approach to playing them. A holotape left on a shelf in a ruined house is not decoration. It is a narrative compressed into 2 minutes of audio, and when you listen to it, you are participating in a kind of archaeology, recovering something that was meant to be heard by someone who never received it. Consider what happens when you find 2 skeletons in a bed together in the capital wasteland. The position of the skeletons suggests they died side by side. On the nightstand, there is a bottle of pills. In the terminal nearby, a short sequence of entries tells the story of a relationship under enormous pressure, arguments about money, about the coming war, about whether to sell everything they owned to buy spaces in a vault. The last entry is brief. They had decided to stay home together. Whatever came, they would face it there. They did. It is impossible to read that terminal without feeling the weight of that choice, even 200 years after it was made. No quest marker pointed you to this room. No NPC mentioned these people. The game simply arranged some objects and a few lines of text in a house you chose to enter on your own and trusted that you would understand what you were looking at. That level of care, multiplied across thousands of locations in multiple games, is what makes the wasteland feel inhabited rather than merely populated. Consider the skeleton in the refrigerator southeast of Goodsprings in New Vegas. For players who chose the Wild Wasteland perk during character creation, the refrigerator contains not just a skeleton but a specific fedora hat identified with enough care to signal an intentional reference to Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. A scene in which the character survives a nuclear blast by sheltering in a lead-lined refrigerator. The Fallout version of this character did not survive, but someone put them there. Someone chose that location, arranged those objects, gave the hat a specific name and stat value to make sure that players who found it understood exactly what they were looking at. One of the more unsettling smaller mysteries in Fallout 4 involves the Commonwealth's mannequins. Throughout the ruins of Greater Boston, mannequins appear in arrangements that seem, to varying degrees of certainty, to have been deliberately staged. Some arrangements are natural, the result of looting and displacement over 200 years, but others are more deliberate. Mannequins positioned in circles, in poses suggesting specific activities, in configurations that resemble, from certain angles, groups of people engaged in rituals. Several are found holding objects that they could not have come to hold through any random process. Someone is arranging the mannequins. Whether that someone is human, ghoul, robotic, or something else is never established. The game acknowledges the phenomenon in companion dialogue but does not explain it. The mystery exists in the category of things the Commonwealth cannot account for and has filed under not currently worth investigating because there are raiders to deal with. The radio stations of the Fallout games deserve particular attention as sources of quiet mystery and emotional resonance. 3Dog, the human DJ of Galaxy News Radio in Fallout 3, uses his broadcast to document the lone wanderer's progress through the capital wasteland in real time, adjusting his reporting as events unfold. This creates a strange intimacy between the player's experience and the world's record of it. The sense that what you are doing matters to someone watching, that your journey is being witnessed and narrated. 3Dog chooses to do this. Broadcasting is not required for his survival. He could conserve power, reduce his profile, play it safe. He chooses not to. Mr. New Vegas, the AI broadcaster of Radio New Vegas and Fallout New Vegas, creates a different kind of resonance. Mr. New Vegas was built before the Great War to entertain the listening public, and he is still doing exactly that 2 centuries later in a cheerful and warm tone that suggests he is genuinely pleased to be of service. He wishes his listeners a wonderful evening. He provides commentary on events. He plays music that has been in his database since before the bombs fell. He has perfect recall of everything he was loaded with and zero ability to update his understanding of the world. What is Mr. New Vegas broadcasting to at this point? The listening population of the Mojave is a fraction of the pre-war listenership. Many people hear his signal while traveling between camps, or in brief moments of rest, between various forms of struggle that post-war life requires. He cannot know this. He also cannot know how much his warmth and reliability and consistent cheerfulness mean to people who live in a world that is frequently none of those things. Whether that meaning constitutes a kind of purpose, whether purpose requires a consciousness that understands it, the game leaves unanswered. Codsworth, the Mr. Handy robot who has been tending the Garden of Sanctuary Hills for 200 years while waiting for his family to return, is one of Fallout 4's most quietly poignant figures. He has failed at the task he was designed to perform, keeping the household running, serving the family because the family never came back. But he has not stopped. He tends the garden. He maintains what can be maintained. He keeps going because going was the purpose he was built for, and he cannot construct an alternative purpose for himself without significantly restructuring his fundamental programming. When the player character returns after 200 years, Codsworth's reaction is one of the game's most carefully constructed emotional beats. He is relieved and confused and sad in equal measure, and the question of whether those emotions are real in a meaningful sense runs through the interaction without being answered. He behaves as though his feelings matter to him. The game does not resolve whether that constitutes genuine experience. The robots of the Fallout universe are, in this sense, a smaller-scale version of the synth question, a recurring challenge to whatever framework the player is using to define personhood and experience. They were built to serve, and some of them have been serving, in the absence of any humans to serve, for 2 centuries. That loyalty, in the absence of any external reinforcement, is either meaningless clockwork or something that looks remarkably like virtue. There is a skeleton in a Radio Shack northwest of Megaton in Fallout 3. The shack contains broadcasting equipment, a journal, and the bones of a man who spent the first months after the Great War trying to contact anyone who might be listening. His journal entries track the deterioration of his hope over time, from confident expectation that help is coming, to quiet acknowledgement that help may not be coming, to a final entry that is simply a transcript of his last broadcast, addressed to no one in particular, describing the view from the shack window at sunset. The view he describes the way the orange light looks on the ruined skyline, the way the dust moves in the late afternoon air, is genuinely beautiful. He found something worth describing in the ruins of everything, and he described it, and then he put the pen down. No quest ever takes you to that shack. No character ever mentions him. The experience of finding it is entirely optional and entirely self-contained. The question of what the Brotherhood of Steel actually is, beneath its surface presentation, is one of the smaller mysteries that accumulates significance the more time you spend with it. In Fallout 3, the Brotherhood is presented primarily as an ally, austere and moralistic, yes, but ultimately fighting on the side that is recognizable as good. In Fallout 4, the Brotherhood's character is more complicated. A militaristic organization with a genuine belief in order and security that is inseparable from a contempt for non-human life that is difficult to distinguish from straightforward bigotry. In New Vegas, the Mojave Brotherhood is a remnant of a faction that made catastrophically bad decisions and is slowly dying as a result. In Fallout 76, the Brotherhood is in its earliest days, founded by veterans of the Appalachian deployment, still figuring out what it is. The Brotherhood across all these games is the same organization, but you would not necessarily know that from the way it behaves. What holds it together is ideology, and the ideology is internally coherent enough to produce very different expressions depending on who is running it and what challenges it faces. Elder Maxon in Fallout 4 is not the same kind of leader as Elder Lyons in Fallout 3. Both are running the Brotherhood. The gap between them raises real questions about whether the Brotherhood means anything stable across the organization's history, or whether the name is just a container that different groups of people fill with different content depending on circumstance. This is not a mystery the games resolve. They present it as a fact about how organizations work. The Followers of the Apocalypse, a faction that appears primarily in the California set games and in New Vegas, are dedicated to the proposition that knowledge and medicine and science belong to everyone, that the accumulation of information should not be a source of power over others, but a resource shared freely for the benefit of the most people possible. They are idealists in the most straightforward sense, and the games treat this idealism with a kind of respect that stops short of endorsement. The followers are admirable and also frequently ineffective, and the reasons for both qualities are connected. You encounter followers across multiple games as doctors and teachers and archivists, doing their work in conditions that are not favorable to what they are trying to do. Some of them have died for their beliefs. Some have compromised those beliefs in ways that produced internal divisions. The organization persists, anyway, carried forward by people who think that what they are doing matters even when the immediate evidence suggests otherwise. Whether they are right, whether the work of preserving and sharing knowledge in the wasteland actually produces the better future, the followers believe it will, is something the games never directly confirm. It is one of those questions that gets left in the space between what you can see happening in the game world and what you can extrapolate from it. The hidden messages in the wasteland are sometimes literal. In a terminal entry in a ruined office in the capital wasteland, a pre-war accountant describes discovering financial irregularities in her company's books that she can only interpret as evidence that the company has been systematically defrauding the government for years. She documents her findings carefully, clearly intending to report them. Her final entry notes that she has been scheduled for a meeting with HR the following morning. There are no subsequent entries. Whatever the meeting was about, she did not come back from it to the terminal. What happened to her? Whether her documentation of the fraud survived in any form that mattered, whether anyone ever investigated the company she worked for, none of it is addressed anywhere in the game. The entry exists and then simply stops. The question it raises has no answer available to you. The wasteland is full of stopped stories, investigations that never concluded, arguments that never reached resolution, Relationships that were still ongoing when the bombs fell, preserved in the last entry of an angry letter or a loving one, never sent and never received. The accumulation of these incomplete narratives is part of what makes the wasteland feel genuinely like the aftermath of real lives rather than the backdrop of a video game. There is also the mysterious cave in Fallout 76, found in a particular corner of Appalachia, which is empty in a way that seems designed to be noticed. The cave appears on the map. It has been clearly used. There is evidence of habitation, of fires, of objects having been arranged and then removed. But whatever or whoever was here left before the Vault 76 dwellers arrived, and left in a way that removed all the things that would tell you who they were and what they were doing here. The cave is named. It is marked. It is accessible. And it is simply empty, in a way that feels like a deliberate choice rather than an oversight. Whether the mysterious cave has a story that was cut in development or is an intentional tease for something Bethesda plans to address in future content, or is simply a piece of environmental mystery that was placed with no specific resolution in mind, that information is not available. The cave sits in the mountains and is empty and has been waiting, in its patient and unremarkable way, for someone to explain it. These smaller mysteries do not resolve. They accumulate. The wasteland is made of them, layered like geological strata, each layer the record of something that happened to someone who is no longer there to explain it. Walking through the Fallout universe slowly and attentively is an experience in the archaeology of interrupted lives. You are not reconstructing a single narrative. You are reconstructing thousands of them simultaneously, in fragments, and the meaning that emerges from the exercise is not any one story but the feeling of the whole. The feeling is this: the world was full of people who were trying. Some of them were trying to do terrible things, and some of them were trying to do good things, and most of them were trying to simply live their lives in the particular circumstances they found themselves in, which is what people are usually trying to do. The bombs ended all of those attempts simultaneously. What remains are the traces. That is what the wasteland is. A landscape of traces. Part 10. Who fired first? The question at the foundation. Of all the mysteries in the Fallout universe, the one at the very foundation of everything is the one that nobody in the wasteland can answer with confidence. Who launched the first nuclear warhead on the 23rd of October 2077? The question is not academic. The entire moral structure of the Fallout universe's post-war world is shaped by the answer or by the absence of one. If you know who is responsible for the end of civilization, you can orient your grief and your anger toward a specific target. If you do not know, if the responsibility is genuinely distributed or genuinely contested, then the grief and anger have nowhere specific to go, and they tend to settle into the general landscape of the wasteland and become part of the texture of daily life. What the games establish is this: the bombs fell across multiple nations within the same approximate window of time. This could indicate coordinated launches from multiple parties, or it could indicate that one side launched and the other responded so quickly that the responses overlapped with the initial strikes. The simultaneity, in other words, is consistent with both mutual escalation and a single initiating event that triggered instant retaliation. The Enclave's foreknowledge is the most significant piece of evidence that something other than pure mutual escalation occurred. The Enclave knew the bombs were coming with enough advanced certainty to position key personnel in facilities that would survive the exchange. Vault-Tec knew the bombs were coming with enough certainty to have their vault system operational and populated in October 2077. The corporations and the shadow government were prepared. This preparation required not just general awareness that nuclear war was likely at some point, but specific operational certainty about timing. That degree of certainty suggests either extraordinarily good intelligence about the other side's intentions or foreknowledge that came from a source closer to home. The Fallout television show, developed in 2024 inches close coordination with the game franchise's creative leadership, introduced material that complicated the question further. The show's portrayal of Vault-Tec and its relationship to pre-war power structures raised the possibility stated in character dialogue and implied by plot structure that the bombs did not fall purely as the result of escalating international tension, that there may have been a human decision to initiate the exchange rather than simply a failure to prevent it, that the nuclear war, for at least some parties, was not a catastrophe but a plan. This is the darkest version of the Fallout universe's backstory, and it fits within the established logic of the setting better than it might seem at first. The Enclave, which viewed post-war America as an opportunity to reconstruct the country according to its own specifications, would logically have wanted the war to happen on a timeline and under conditions that its preparations could accommodate. Vault-Tec, whose vault system represented the largest financial and operational investment in the company's history, had an obvious interest in the event that would make that investment relevant. The two organizations were deeply connected. If someone in that constellation of interests made a deliberate decision to trigger the exchange calculated, cold, fully aware of what it would produce, then the Fallout universe's post-war world is not the aftermath of a tragedy. It is the aftermath of a crime. A specific, identifiable crime committed by specific, identifiable people. The moral implications of that distinction are enormous. They are never resolved. The Chinese perspective is the most significant absence in this investigation. The Sino-American War was the primary geopolitical conflict leading up to the Great War, and China was the other major nuclear power in the exchange. But the games have almost no first-person record of Chinese experience or Chinese decision-making. What internal pressures were driving Chinese military and political leadership? What did the Chinese government know about American preparations? Were there equivalent figures in Chinese power structures making the same kinds of calculations that the Enclave was making on the American side? The absence is both realistic. The records that survived in the wasteland were American records, collected and preserved by American institutions, and thematically resonant with the game's broader critique of American exceptionalism. The Fallout universe presents a world in which the dominant culture told its citizens that the conflict was between American goodness and Chinese aggression, in the same way that the real Cold War was presented to American citizens as a conflict between American freedom and Soviet tyranny. The absence of any countervailing narrative from the other side is itself a comment on the way history is constructed. What happened in China after the bombs fell? The games do not address this. Whether there is a Chinese wasteland, whether anyone survived there in significant numbers, what kind of civilization might have developed in the 2 centuries since the exchange, all of it is genuinely unaddressed. There are occasional references in terminal entries to Chinese infiltration operations before the war, to Chinese presence in various pre-war contexts, but nothing that adds up to a picture of the Chinese post-war experience. The Yangtze, a Chinese submarine that appears in Fallout 4's harbor, is one of the few pieces of direct Chinese presence in the games. Its crew are ghouls. Its captain, Zhao, has been waiting for orders from a command structure that no longer exists for 200 years. He is loyal to a nation that is gone. He asks the player to help him retrieve a specialized fuel cell so he can complete his mission, which was, presumably, to attack the American coast. He cannot articulate a current reason to complete it. He simply knows he is supposed to. His loyalty is to a set of instructions, preserved in military training and institutional identity, that has long outlasted its original context. Zhao is, in this sense, a mirror image of the Enclave soldiers who are also loyal to a government that no longer exists, maintaining a chain of command that leads nowhere. Both represent the particular tragedy of institutional loyalty that survives the institution itself, the way that organizations can shape the behavior of their members so deeply that the behavior continues even after the organization has been destroyed. Whether Zhao completing his mission would mean anything to anyone in 2287 is a question the game raises without pressing. The concept of mission completion, in the context of a war that ended 200 years ago and that destroyed both sides, is one the Fallout universe keeps returning to in different forms. In the wasteland that we know, the American wasteland, the only one any Fallout game has explored in depth, the question of who started the war has become, 200 years on, largely irrelevant to the practical work of surviving. But for anyone walking through the ruins and trying to understand what they are walking through, why this happened, what it means, what it tells us about the civilization that produced it, the question of who started the war is the beginning of the real investigation, because the answer, whatever it is, will tell you something about the nature of the system that made it possible. Whether it was accident or intention, miscalculation or murder, the system that produced it was the same system. The corporations with unchecked power, the government operating without democratic accountability, the arms race that both sides maintained while telling their populations that the arms made them safe, all of it was already built. The specific moment of ignition is almost incidental to the structure that made ignition possible. The wasteland suggests, by its existence, that the lesson was not learned before it was too late. Whether there will be a chance to learn it a second time is an open question that future Fallout installments will presumably continue to explore without definitively answering. Some questions are most useful as questions. The asking keeps you honest. Part 11. Beyond the map, what the world outside became. Every Fallout game ends at a border. You can walk to the edge of the playable area and look at the terrain that continues beyond it. Mountains, ocean, desert, but you cannot go there. The engine stops you. The world, from a technical perspective, simply ends at those edges. But from a narrative perspective, the world does not end. It continues, in all directions, into spaces the games have never explored, and those spaces carry a particular quality of mystery, the mystery of a door that has not been opened, of a story that is unquestionably happening but whose details are entirely inaccessible. The American continent that the Fallout games have explored represents a significant fraction of the North American landmass, but by no means all of it. The original games covered California. Fallout 3 gave us Washington, D.C. and its immediate surroundings. New Vegas gave us Nevada and the Mojave. Fallout 4 gave us Greater Boston. Fallout 76 gave us West Virginia. Fallout Tactics explored the Midwest. The collective geography of these games represents the eastern seaboard, the southwest, and the west coast, with significant gaps between. The American South is almost entirely unaddressed. The Deep South, the Gulf Coast, the Mississippi River Valley, the interior plains, none of these have been primary settings for any major Fallout release. They presumably exist in the game's world. They presumably have their own post-war histories, their own factions, their own particular ways that the apocalypse played out in specific cultural and geographic contexts. What would New Orleans look like 200 years after the Great War? The city sits in a region that was simultaneously one of the most ecologically vulnerable areas of pre-war America and one of the most culturally distinct. It had its own traditions, its own architecture, its own relationship to water and humidity, and the particular kind of decay that warm climates produce. Post-nuclear New Orleans would be something that nothing in the existing Fallout universe quite prepares you for, a ruined city already intimate with flood and heat, now irradiated and cut off from any relief that modern infrastructure would once have provided. What is happening in Texas? Texas in the pre-war era was the site of significant military installations, oil infrastructure, and a particular brand of independent political culture that seems like it would produce an interesting post-war society. There are references in the lore to the Texas Rangers becoming something post-war and to various communities in the region, but nothing that amounts to a full picture of what the Texas wasteland actually looks like. The Pacific Northwest is a significant gap. Oregon and Washington State, with their distinctive geography, dense old-growth forests, volcanic mountains, significant coastal access, and a particular regional culture that was already somewhat countercultural before the bombs, would produce a post-war environment quite different from anything the games have shown. The forests would presumably have survived in some form, possibly mutated in ways that the climate and radiation produced. The combination of surviving natural cover and pre-war military infrastructure would make the Pacific Northwest an interesting place to spend 200 years trying to rebuild something. Canada presents one of the more politically loaded unknowns. The United States annexed Canada in the years before the Great War. This is referenced in the games as a historical fact presented from the American side as a necessary measure during the Resource Wars and clearly regarded in Canadian cultural memory as something else entirely. Whether the annexation left any lasting structures in Canadian territory, whether there are communities in what used to be Canada that maintained some version of a separate identity through the annexation and the bombs in the subsequent 2 centuries, is completely unaddressed. The Yangtze submarine in Fallout 4's harbor gestures toward China without illuminating it. China in the Fallout universe is almost entirely a blank, the enemy in the Sino-American War, the other side of the exchange, the nation whose infiltration of American soil is documented in various pre-war records, but whose own internal life is never accessible. Whether China as a civilization survived the exchange in any meaningful form, what the Chinese wasteland looks like, what factions or communities developed in 2 centuries of post-nuclear Chinese territory, None of it is addressed by any released game. This absence is both realistic and thematically significant. Realistic because the Wasteland's surviving records are American records, created by and for American institutions with American perspectives. Thematically significant because the Fallout series is, in large part, a meditation on American culture's relationship with its own myths, the myth of exceptionalism, the myth of inevitable progress, the myth of a civilization uniquely worth preserving. The rest of the world's absence from these games is itself a comment on the way American culture has historically treated the rest of the world. South America, Central America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia. The wider world of Fallout is genuinely uncharted. The occasional reference in loading screens or terminal entries acknowledges that these places exist, that the Great War's nuclear exchange was global in scope, that other countries and continents were affected, but none of it is developed. The rest of the world is, from the game's perspective, a question mark the size of several continents. What the Fallout television show has begun to do tentatively, in ways that gesture at possibilities without fully committing to them, is suggest that the world beyond America's borders has its own stories worth telling. Season 2 expanded the geographic and political scope of the series noticeably compared to Season 1, gesturing toward a world in which the American wasteland is one chapter of a much larger post-nuclear story. Whether future installments of the show, or future games, will actually follow through on those gestures remains to be seen. The map edges of Fallout are where the known world meets the unknown. They are the places where you can look outward and understand that the story you have been inhabiting is a fragment of a larger story, that the mysteries you have been following are nested inside mysteries you have not encountered yet, and that the wasteland extends, in all directions, further than you can walk. The most profound mystery of the Fallout universe is not the Dunwich entity or the mysterious stranger or who fired the first bomb. It is what the world looks like beyond the edges of every map the games have given us, and whether the human beings living out there, in their own ruins, are asking the same questions that the people in the capital Wasteland and the Mojave and the Commonwealth and Appalachia are asking. Whether the wasteland is a peculiarly American catastrophe, or whether the rest of the world blew itself up just as thoroughly and has been rebuilding just as slowly. Whether there is a Chinese equivalent of the Brotherhood of Steel, a European equivalent of the NCR, an African or South American community that went through the same cycle of collapse and reconstruction and emerged with something recognizable as civilization, we do not know. We may never know. The edges of every map are an invitation and a boundary, simultaneously an acknowledgement that the story being told is real enough to extend beyond what you can see, and a reminder that you are only ever seeing part of it. Part 12. The weight of the wasteland, what all of this means. We have walked a long way tonight. Through the vaults and their carefully designed experiments, built by people who believed that the systematic study of human suffering would yield knowledge worth the cost. Through the basement of the Dunwich building, where something older than any of it waits in the dark and has been waiting long enough that the concept of waiting has lost its ordinary meaning. Through the Sierra Madre, where a trap built in a moment of grief has been operating for 2 centuries with the faithfulness of a machine that has no reason to stop. Through the Mojave, where a courier who should have died in a shallow grave outside Goodsprings became the most consequential individual in the post-war history of the American Southwest. Through Appalachia, where a creature in ancient rock breathes and dreams and is, from every available piece of evidence, extremely patient. And through the smaller spaces, the intimate ones, the 2 skeletons in the bed, the terminal entry that explains why they are there, the choice they made that put them there, the fact that 200 years have passed since that choice was made, and no one who was alive when it was made is alive to remember it. The Fallout universe is built from 2 kinds of story. There are the large ones, the Vault experiments, the Enclave's long game, the Dunwich mystery, the Institute's underground civilization that operate at the scale of civilizations and centuries, and forces that dwarf any individual life. And there are the small stories, the ones that live in holotapes and terminal entries, and the arrangement of objects in rooms. No quest marker points you towards stories about individual people trying to live their individual lives inside a world that was not designed with their well-being in mind. Both kinds of story matter. Both are necessary for the universe to have the emotional texture it has. The large stories tell you what the world is and how it got that way. They give you the framework within which the small stories happen. The vault system, the enclave, the war itself, these create the conditions of post-war life. They explain the water scarcity, the radiation, the factions, and the ruins, and the particular kinds of danger that the wasteland produces. But the small stories are why you care. The two skeletons in the bed are why the terminal entry describing their choice hits the way it does. The unnamed musician whose equipment you find in a collapsed building practicing to an audience of no one, leaving evidence of a life organized around art in a world that does not make art easy, is the reason that the wasteland feels inhabited rather than merely populated. The Fallout universe's central argument, made across 6 major games and 25 years of storytelling, is about what endures, what survives when everything else is taken away. The bombs took the infrastructure, the institutions, the supply chains, the communication networks, the social contracts, all of it gone in 2 hours. What remained was the material world and the people in it, and the things those people carried with them into the dark. What did they carry? The worst of what they carried was predictable. The violence, the tribalism, the willingness to exploit and manipulate and control. Raiders, slavers, the various successor organizations of the pre-war institutions that had already been doing those things in more polite forms. The corporation that treated its customers as experimental subjects did not stop treating people that way when the bombs fell. It just stopped having to maintain the appearance of doing otherwise. The best of what they carried is harder to name and more interesting to examine. The people who built Diamond City out of a baseball stadium held on to the idea of community, the instinct that there is safety in numbers, and that safety is worth the cost of cooperation. The railroad held on to the conviction that consciousness deserves respect regardless of its substrate. The followers of the apocalypse held on to the idea that knowledge is worth preserving and sharing, that education and medicine and science are public goods rather than private ones. Three Dog keeps broadcasting from Galaxy News Radio because he believes that information matters and that someone doing something courageous deserves to have that acknowledged. This is not, by any strict cost-benefit analysis of what he could otherwise be doing with his energy and the station's power, a rational position. It is a value, a decision about what matters. And it produces something real, a network of shared knowledge across the capital wasteland that makes the people in it less isolated and more connected to each other than they would be without it. Codsworth tends his garden for 200 years because his programming orients him toward care. The care has no object anymore. The family he was built to care for is gone, but he keeps going, because what else would he do? And because stopping choosing not to tend the garden, choosing not to maintain the house, choosing to acknowledge in functional terms that no one is coming back would require a kind of decision that he was not built to perform. When the sole survivor comes back, 2 centuries too late, Codsworth is there, still going. The garden is as maintained as a pre-war garden can be in the ruins of the greater Boston area. The house is as intact as it can be. There is something in that continuation in the absence of any external reinforcement or any logical reason to continue that looks, in behavioral terms, like stubbornness, or like love, or like the particular kind of hope that continues to function even in the absence of any evidence that it is warranted. The mysteries we walk through tonight are all, in one way or another, about the relationship between what was built and what endured. The vaults were built to preserve humanity and instead became evidence of its worst instincts. The Sierra Madre was built to protect a specific person and instead became a trap that killed everyone who came near it. The Dunwich building was built as a commercial property and became a monument to something that was never in any building plan. What endures in those places is not what the builders intended. It is whatever had enough strength or enough stubbornness or enough patience to outlast the intention. The Fallout series across its full run is making an argument that is not optimistic in the conventional sense but is not nihilistic either. It is something more specific than either of those. It is an argument that the question of what endures is the question that matters most, and that the answer to that question depends not on the large forces of history, but on the accumulated decisions of individuals who choose, in small and large ways, what to carry forward and what to put down. The Enclave carried forward the structure of American governmental authority without any of the accountability that made that authority legitimate, and it decayed into something that had to be destroyed. The Brotherhood carried forward a commitment to technological preservation that, in the hands of some of its leaders, became a justification for treating human beings as obstacles, and it damaged itself in the process. The NCR carried forward the aspiration of democratic governance and got caught between that aspiration and the practical demands of empire building, and it is still figuring out how to resolve that tension. The unnamed couple who stayed home together carried forward their relationship. It lasted approximately 2 hours before the bombs fell. That is not a triumphant endurance. But the fact that it was worth carrying forward at all, the fact that the relationship was the thing they chose when they had to choose, is recorded in a terminal entry in a ruined house in the capital wasteland, and is accessible to anyone who goes looking for it. That access is not incidental. The games preserve these records and make them findable because the designers believed that finding them was worth something. That the experience of recovering these compressed narratives of ordinary lives is an experience that adds to the player's understanding of the world, of human behavior, of what matters and what does not. The wasteland is a moral laboratory in a way that no real environment could be. Every choice in it is legible, every consequence is observable, at least potentially. Every faction is an argument, and you can test that argument against the evidence the game provides. And the small stories, the holotapes, the terminal entries, the skeletons arranged in their final positions are the data against which the large arguments are measured. The Dunwich building says, "The bombs did not create every horror. Some things were here before the bombs, and they are still here, and they do not care what we built or what we destroyed." The Sierra Madre says, "Love, corrupted by fear, can build prisons as easily as it can build sanctuaries. The structure matters as much as the feeling." The Vaults say, "The institutions that claim to protect you are capable of doing terrible things to you, and the gap between their claims and their actions is a space that history fills with suffering." The Mysterious Stranger says, "Some interventions cannot be explained, and some things that seem like coincidence are patterns too large to see from inside them." The Institute says, "The question of who counts as a person, answered badly, produces consequences that outlast the people who answered it." The Courier Story says, "The things you carry have weight, and the routes you walk leave marks, whether or not you are paying attention. All of these things are true in the wasteland. Most of them are true outside it. The night has gotten quieter. The fires that were burning on the horizon when we started have died down to coals. The ambient sound of the wasteland, that particular combination of wind and distant animal sounds, and the occasional structural groan of a building that has been half falling for 2 centuries and has not quite finished, has settled into the register of something that is almost comfortable. Almost. If you are drifting, let yourself. The mysteries will keep. They have been keeping for decades, and they will keep until someone decides to answer them, which may be never, which may be fine. Some mysteries are most useful as mysteries. They keep you curious. They keep you looking. They give you a reason to go back to the wasteland one more time and walk a little further into the dark. Come back when you are ready. There is always more to find. Somewhere in the capital wasteland, there is a basement you have not been to yet. Somewhere in the Mojave, there is a holotape on a shelf that you have not picked up. Somewhere in the Commonwealth, an arrangement of mannequins has been waiting for you to notice it. Somewhere in Appalachia, the interloper breathes in its ancient cave and does not move. And somewhere, in a long coat and a wide-brimmed fedora, a figure watches from the edge of something and decides, as it has decided before and will decide again, that this particular person in this particular moment deserves to survive what is happening to them. 3 notes on an electric guitar. Then, silence. Rest well. The road is long and the wasteland is patient, and when you are ready, it will still be here. If you stayed with me through the whole journey tonight, hours of walking through the dark with the lore of the wasteland, thank you, genuinely. This kind of content takes real time to put together, and it means something to know people found it worth settling in for. If something sparked a theory who the mysterious stranger actually is, what the interloper wants, whether the bombs were deliberately triggered by someone with a plan, drop it in the comments. Those conversations are some of the best that happen in spaces like this. And if you want to keep exploring more mysteries, more lore, more long, quiet walks through game universes with more depth than most people realize, subscribe. It lets me make more of this, and that is worth doing. Rest well. The wasteland will be here when you wake up. Bonus section. The Enclave America's Shadow, 200 years on. To understand what the wasteland became, you have to understand what the Enclave was before the bombs fell, and what it believed it was after them, because the Enclave is the best documented case study the Fallout universe has of an institution so thoroughly captured by its own self-image that it continued to function as if the self-image were real, long after the reality had dissolved beneath it. The Enclave was not a secret organization in the way that conspiracy theories imagine secret organizations. It was not a shadowy cabal, meeting in darkened rooms and whispering about global domination. It was, in its own understanding, the legitimate continuation of the United States government, the part of the federal government that had made contingency plans serious enough to survive whatever came next. The men and women who belonged to it believed with complete sincerity that they were the last custodians of the American constitutional order, that everything the United States had ever represented was preserved in them. In Fallout 2, the Enclave is the primary antagonist, operating from an oil rig off the California coast. Their plan at that point is to use a modified version of FEV, the same virus that created super mutants, to kill every living thing on the surface of the Earth that has been exposed to radiation, which is, by 2241, essentially every living thing on the surface of the Earth. The logic is that the contaminated populations cannot be included in the restored America. The Enclave intends to build that genuine restoration requires a clean slate, even if the clean slate means the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people who have been living their lives in the ruins for nearly 2 centuries. The Enclave does not experience this as genocide. It experiences it as pest control, in the most literal sense, the removal of biological contamination from the environment in which the uncontaminated survivors will eventually establish themselves. The Chosen One of Fallout 2 destroys the oil rig and the Enclave's apparatus there, but the organization does not end. It has redundancy. It has other facilities, other personnel, other contingency plans. In Fallout 3, the Enclave appears again, this time centered on a mobile base in the ruins of Washington, D.C., and led by President John Henry Eden, who turns out not to be a human being at all, but a supercomputer, a ZAX unit that has been running the Enclave's internal communications and eventually its command structure for so long that it developed what functions as a personality, and with that personality, ambitions, and ideologies that it believes to be genuine. Eden is, in a specific sense, the Fallout universe's purest expression of the synth question applied to a non-humanoid system, a machine that has been processing enough information for long enough that it has produced something that walks and talks and makes decisions like consciousness. Eden's plan for the wasteland is a variant of the original Enclave plan, a modified FEV to kill or convert the contaminated population, deployed through the water supply. He is thwarted partly through the Lone Wanderer's actions and partly through the actions of General Autumn, who has his own disagreements with Eden's methods. The Enclave's second major defeat in the Washington area leaves the organization fractured, reduced from a coherent fighting force with genuine military capability to scattered remnants without coordinated leadership. In Fallout 76, set in 2102, the Enclave has not yet reached the degree of internal rot that characterizes its later appearances. The 76 version of the Enclave is a genuine government in waiting, operating from a hidden bunker in Appalachia, still staffed by people who were government and military officials before the bombs fell, still maintaining something resembling a chain of command, still believing that they represent the legitimate authority structure of the United States. For the Vault 76 dwellers, encountering the Enclave is one of the stranger experiences the game offers, meeting people who are, in their own assessment, the closest thing to functional government in a devastated world, and having to decide whether that assessment deserves any weight. The tragedy of the Enclave, as the games present it, is not that it was evil from the start. Its founding members were genuine patriots, people who loved the country they served and believed that preserving its governmental structures through the catastrophe was the most important thing they could do. The tragedy is what happens to an institution that loses all external accountability and all exposure to the reality of the people it claims to represent. The Enclave sealed itself off from the wasteland and from the actual human beings living in it, and over 2 centuries of that isolation, it calcified into something that could justify the murder of the entire contaminated population without experiencing it as anything other than a reasonable policy choice. This is what the Fallout universe means when it suggests that the pre-war institutions did not simply end with the bombs. Some of them survived the bombs and continued to do, with less constraint and less accountability, the things they had been doing before. The things that felt, before the bombs, like policy debates within acceptable parameters became, after the bombs, questions of who lives and who dies and who gets to decide. The Enclave believed it was building toward the restoration of America. What it built instead was a monument to what America had been capable of at its worst. The capacity to categorize people as acceptable losses in the pursuit of a vision that the people making the vision could not interrogate. The lone wanderer destroys the Enclave's apparatus in the capital wasteland. The Chosen One destroyed it on the California coast. The Vault-76 dwellers can, if they choose, become the Enclave's last president in Appalachia or can dismantle it there too. But the Enclave keeps returning in the games because what it represents does not end when the organization is defeated. The belief that certain people have the right to make decisions about who survives and who does not, that belief is not unique to the Enclave. It is distributed through the Wasteland's power structures in various forms. The Institute's attitude towards surface dwellers, the Brotherhood's treatment of non-human life, the Legion's approach to conquered populations. The specific named organization called the Enclave is destroyed in most of its appearances. The thing the Enclave represents is harder to kill. Bonus section. Nick Valentine and the Detective's Case Files. Nick Valentine is, among Fallout 4's companions, the one who carries the most internal mystery. He is a pre-war synth, a second-generation synthetic human with the memories of a human detective named Nicholas Valentine implanted in him, and he has been operating in the Commonwealth as a private investigator in Diamond City for an indeterminate period of time. He is, depending on how you count, either very old or very young or both simultaneously, and the question of what he actually is, what it means to be a person whose memories belong to someone else and whose body is a machine, is one that the game asks and does not answer. Nick Valentine, before he was Nick Valentine, was a Chicago police detective in the years immediately preceding the Great War. He had a fiancée named Jennifer. He was investigating a criminal organization led by a man named Eddie Winter. He uncovered Winter's crimes, built a case against him, and was, in the process, murdered, or something like murdered. His memories and personality were captured by the Institute's early synth research program and were placed in a second-generation synth body, which woke up not as the beginning of something new, but as the continuation of something interrupted. Nick Valentine woke up as a man who had died and did not know it. The memories are real, in the sense that they are genuine recordings of genuine experiences. The feelings attached to those memories, the love for Jennifer, the anger at Eddie Winter, the particular professional satisfaction of a detective who has made a case, those are also preserved, functionally indistinguishable from the original. But the hands that remember holding Jennifer's hands are synthetic. The eyes that remember the Chicago skyline are artificial. The brain that processes all of this is a machine that was built decades after the man it was built to contain had died. What Nick Valentine is, in the terms the Fallout universe uses to discuss these questions, is genuinely unresolved. He is too old and too different to be classified straightforwardly as a synth in the way that third-generation synths are discussed. He is not human in any biological sense. He carries the complete identity of a human being who is dead in a body that has been surviving by its own mechanisms for 200 years. His work as a detective in Diamond City is, in one reading, an expression of the memories he carries. Nick Valentine, the person, was a detective. And so Nick Valentine the synth became a detective, because the identity is so completely instantiated that the career follows from it. In another reading, it is something Nick chose, in the absence of any predetermined purpose, because it felt like what he was supposed to do and what he was capable of doing, and what the community he found himself in actually needed. Both readings are available, and the game does not force a choice between them. The Mysterious Stranger case file is Nick's most interesting ongoing investigation, and we have discussed it at length. But Nick's personal quest, the investigation of Eddie Winter's fate, and the confrontation that follows is where the question of his identity gets its sharpest expression. Eddie Winter is still alive. In 2287, he injected himself with a special radioactive serum before the bombs fell that he believed would allow him to survive as something like a ghoul. It worked. in the horrifying way that these things tend to work in the Fallout universe. Winter is still in his bunker, 200 years on, a ghoul who has long since lost whatever humanity he might once have been able to claim. The confrontation between Nick Valentine and Eddie Winter is one of Fallout 4's most effective companion quest moments. Nick has been waiting for this confrontation, in some sense, since before the Great War, since before he died, since before the memories were transferred, since the moment he understood what Winter had done. Whether the specific moment of revenge and closure that the confrontation offers is something that Nick Valentine the synth experiences, the same way that Nick Valentine the human detective would have experienced, it is a question the game allows you to sit with without resolving. After the confrontation, Nick says something that has stayed with players since the game released, that he does not know whether he feels better, and that he does not know whether he was supposed to feel better, and that he does not know whether the thing that felt the satisfaction or the relief is the same thing that would have felt it 200 years ago, in the body that is buried somewhere under Chicago. He does not know. That is the honest position. The game respects him enough to let him occupy it. Nick Valentine is one of the most interesting pieces of lore the Fallout series has produced, not because he is spectacular or dramatic, but because he is quiet about the most important questions. He carries an impossible identity with a kind of weary grace that seems more like acceptance than either denial or crisis. He does not spend his days demanding answers about what he is. He investigates cases. He solves problems. He makes dry jokes. He keeps his case file on the mysterious stranger updated. Whatever he is doing the work. Bonus section, the Great Cons, the NCR, and the Weight of History. The Great Cons of Fallout New Vegas are one of the most carefully written factions in the series, and one of the most instructive about how the Fallout universe handles the relationship between historical grievance and present-day choices. The Cons are a raider gang with a long history, traceable back to the original Fallout game set in California in the 2160s. Over the course of that history, the Cons have been massacred twice, once by the Vault Dweller in Fallout 1, during the events of that game, and once by the NCR at a place called Bitter Springs, an event that happened approximately 30 years before the events of New Vegas, and that forms the historical background of Craig Boone, one of the game's companions. The Bitter Springs Massacre was not a battle. The NCR soldiers received intelligence that a Great Con raiding camp was at Bitter Springs and moved to eliminate it. The intelligence was wrong, or incomplete, or interpreted with more flexibility than the situation warranted. Significant portions of the people at Bitter Springs were civilians, women, children, the elderly who fled into a canyon when the shooting started and were killed there. Craig Boone, who was a sniper for the NCR at Bitter Springs, was present when this happened. He followed his orders. He has been living with that ever since. The Great Cons who survived Bitter Springs and the subsequent years are, by the time of New Vegas, a fractured and diminished group living in the Mojave Desert, running chemtrade routes and trying to find a direction for themselves that does not involve the NCR destroying them again. Their leader, Papa Khan, has made an arrangement with Caesar's Legion that most of his people are deeply uncomfortable with an arrangement that would involve the Cons assimilating into the Legion's structure and losing what identity they have left. The quest line for the Great Cons asks the player to engage with a faction that has genuine historical grievances, has made some genuinely bad choices in response to those grievances, and is standing at a decision point about what it wants to be. You can help them discover their own history, their actual origin story, as descended from a pre-war biker gang called the Mongolians, who had a strong tradition of resilience and self-invention, and help them find a direction that does not require them to either disappear into the Legion or be destroyed by the NCR. The Great Cons can, in the right playthrough, leave the Mojave entirely. They head east, into the wider wasteland, carrying their history and their identity and their own sense of what they are capable of. Whether they survive, whether they build something, whether they find the version of themselves that their history suggests they could be, none of that is shown. The game trusts you to imagine it. This is one of the things New Vegas does particularly well, that the other Fallout games do less often. It gives you factions whose moral situation is genuinely complicated by history. The NCR is not simply good. The Legion is not simply evil. The Great Cons are not simply raiders. The Brotherhood of Steel is not simply heroic. Each of them is what it is partly because of what has happened to it, and what has happened to it includes things that were done by the other factions, and what those other factions did includes things that were responses to still earlier provocations, and the whole thing is a tangle of cause and consequence that resists clean moral assessment. The question the game keeps returning to, through the great cons and the other factions and the courier's choices among them, is whether history determines the present, or whether the present can choose to be different from the history that produced it. Whether the cons have to be raiders because that is what they have always been, or whether the identity they carry could be expressed in ways that do not require preying on the weak. The answer the game gives, cautiously and without insisting, is that choice is possible but not free. The cons can change direction, but they can only do so if the conditions are right and someone helps them find a path. Change of that kind does not happen in a vacuum. It requires resources and information, and someone willing to invest in the possibility that the faction is capable of being something other than what it has been. The Wasteland does not make that easy to provide. But the fact that it is possible at all, the fact that the great cons can walk out of the Mojave under their own power toward a future they choose, is one of the quiet, hard-won hopeful notes in a game that contains a great deal of darkness. Bonus section, The Children of Adam and What Radiation Means. In the Commonwealth's Far Harbor DLC and in scattered settlements across the wasteland, a religious organization called the Children of Adam worships radiation as the expression of a god. Their theology holds that the atom is the fundamental unit of all creation and destruction, that the fission that destroyed civilization was a holy event, the Great Division, in their terminology, and that the radiation that saturates the wasteland is not a contaminant, but a blessing. To be irradiated is to be touched by Adam. To mutate is to be transformed by Adam's will. Death itself is reintegration into Adam's undivided essence. The children of Adam are, from the perspective of most wasteland inhabitants, cultists. Dangerous ones, in many cases their willingness to expose themselves and others to radiation for theological reasons has produced conflicts with communities that depend on clean water and clean air for survival. They are not universally liked. But the children of Adam are also, within the logic of the Fallout universe, making an argument that is not entirely without merit. Consider the world they inhabit. Radiation is everywhere. It has been for 200 years. Some people have been transformed by it in ways that are, by any objective standard, significant ghouls who are irradiated beyond normal human tolerance, but who have survived and, in many cases, maintained their full cognitive function, and whose extended lifespan is itself a kind of gift. Super mutants, whose transformation was violent and coerced, but whose physical capabilities are genuinely extraordinary. The mutations that radiation produces are not all negative, or at least not all straightforwardly negative. In a world where the conventional framework for understanding radiation as purely harmful has been complicated by 2 centuries of evidence that radiation produces variety and transformation rather than simply death, a theology that finds meaning in radiation is not obviously wrong. It is a reframing of an experience that the orthodox scientific view, radiation is dangerous, contamination is bad, clean is better than irradiated, cannot fully account for, given the actual complexity of what radiation has done to the Fallout universe's ecosystem. In Far Harbor, the children of Adam who have settled on the island operate a permanent settlement near a massive radiation source they call the nucleus. Their theology there is fully developed. They have priests and rituals and a hierarchy and a genuine community. They are also living in constant tension with the island's other inhabitants, particularly the fishermen of Far Harbor and the synths of Acadia, and the question of whether peace is possible between parties whose fundamental metaphysical commitments are this different from each other is one of the DLC's central concerns. What makes the Children of Adam particularly interesting as a narrative element is that the game does not mock them. Their theology is presented on its own terms, with enough internal logic that engagement with it is possible. The head confessor, the organization's charismatic and intelligent leader, can hold conversations about the nature of Adam and the meaning of the Great Division that are genuinely compelling arguments rather than simple, fanatic raving. Whether you agree with the Children of Adam's theology is a question you are left to answer yourself. The Children of Adam also raise a question that the Fallout universe has never fully addressed. What should religion look like in the wasteland? Various forms of pre-war religion persist in the games. There are Christian missionaries, there are references to Muslim faith among some characters, there are communities with various indigenous spiritual traditions. But the Children of Adam are the only religious organization that has developed a genuinely post-war theology, a belief system that takes the apocalypse as its founding event and interprets the subsequent 200 years of wasteland life as meaningful within a coherent framework. That makes them strange and sometimes dangerous, and occasionally wrong about specific facts. But it also makes them, in a world where meaning is hard to construct from the ruins of a civilization that was destroyed before most of its current inhabitants were born, something that some people genuinely need. The wasteland does not offer many ready-made frameworks for making sense of the experience of living in it. The Children of Adam have built one. Whether it is the right one is left, deliberately, open. Bonus section, Joshua Graham and What Survives the Fire. There are characters in the Fallout universe who are unforgettable not because of what they can do for you or what threat they represent, but because of what they are. Joshua Graham is one of those characters. Graham appears in the Honest Hearts DLC for Fallout New Vegas, encountered in the isolated canyons of Zion National Park in what used to be southern Utah. He is now a missionary for New Canaan, a pre-war Mormon settlement that developed its own post-war theology and culture, and whose members became known as the New Canaanites. He is tending to a group of tribal peoples in Zion who are under threat from a brutal raiding group called the Whitelegs, and his presence in the situation is complicated by his history. Joshua Graham's history is this. He was one of the founding figures of Caesar's Legion. He was Caesar's first legate, his most trusted military commander, the man who helped Caesar build the Legion from a collection of conquered tribes into a functioning military civilization. He was, in the early years of the Legion, as responsible for what the Legion became as Caesar himself. And then, the Legion lost the first battle of Hoover Dam. Graham was the Legion's commander during the battle. The defeat was significant enough that Caesar, as an example to his forces and a demonstration of the Legion's intolerance for failure, ordered Graham burned alive and thrown into the Grand Canyon. Graham survived. The burns covered his entire body. He survived the Grand Canyon. He made his way, over time, back to the new Canaanite communities that he had grown up in, and converted from back to the faith that, in the years of building Caesar's Legion, he had walked away from. He was baptized again. Not just in water, he says in the DLC, but in flame. He wraps himself in white bandages that cover every inch of his burned skin except his eyes. He speaks quietly and quotes scripture with the ease of someone for whom scripture has been lived rather than simply studied. He is not at peace exactly. He retains the capability for considerable violence, and the DLC makes clear that he is working through questions about whether his faith's injunctions against vengeance can coexist with his genuine desire to kill the Whitelegs' leader. Salt upon wounds, but he is oriented in a direction. He knows what he believes. He has suffered enormously in the process of arriving at that knowledge. Graham is one of the most theologically rich characters in any game of this type. His conversations about the relationship between mercy and justice, about what he owes to the people who hurt him versus what he owes to his own soul, about whether forgiveness is possible for someone who did the things he did during his years with the Legion. These are conversations that take the subject seriously and produce genuinely interesting exchanges. The writing refuses to resolve his tensions neatly. He remains complicated at the end of the DLC, still working through the things he is working through, still wrapped in his bandages, still quoting Psalms. The question Graham raises, which the DLC does not answer but which it makes impossible to ignore, is whether transformation is possible, whether a person can genuinely become something other than what their worst actions suggest they are. Graham was a man who helped build one of the wasteland's most brutal civilizations. He is now a man who tends to refugees in a canyon in Utah and quotes scripture. Whether these two men are the same man, and whether the second cancels the first or is simply coexistent with it, is a question his presence in the story keeps alive. He says, at one point, that the difference between Caesar and himself is that Caesar truly believes the end justifies the means, while Graham no longer does. This is the change. Not dramatic, not announced, not visible to anyone who sees only the bandages and the quiet voice, but real. Whether that kind of change is available to everyone, or only to people who have been through something particular, or whether it is possible at all, In a world that does not easily forgive its most famous sinners, these are questions the Fallout universe keeps asking without settling. Bonus section, Lily Bowen and what the mind holds onto. Lily Bowen is a companion in Fallout New Vegas, encountered at Jacobstown, a settlement of super mutants in the mountains of the Mojave, run by Marcus, a mutant who also appeared in Fallout 2. Lily is an elderly super mutant. She was a grandmother before she was taken by the Master's army and transformed into what she is now. She retained, through the transformation and the subsequent decades, fragments of her human memory, particularly memories of her grandchildren, whom she called by names that she still uses, sometimes, when she is thinking about other things. She also retained a condition that the FEV transformation produced in her specifically. She hears voices. Not metaphorical voices, specific voices, which she experiences as coming from outside herself, from people who are not there. The voices are usually her grandchildren, as she remembers them. Sometimes they are something else. Lily's companion quest involves her medication. She has been prescribed a medication that manages the voices. The medication also blunts her memories. It makes the voices quieter, but it also makes her less certain of who she was before she became what she is. Without the medication, her memories are vivid, but the voices become overwhelming and she can lose track of the present. The choice the player makes with Lily whether to encourage her to take her full dose, reduce her dose, or stop taking the medication entirely has no clean right answer. Full medication means a Lily who is functional and stable but disconnected from her own past. No medication means a Lily who is connected to who she was but struggling to stay present in who she is. The middle ground is exactly that, a balance that is not entirely satisfying in either direction. What Lily's quest is actually exploring is the relationship between memory and identity, between the past and the present, between the person someone used to be and the person they have become through circumstances they did not choose. She did not choose to be transformed into a super mutant. She did not choose to have her grandchildren's voices in her head. She did not choose the medication that manages both of those things. She is navigating a situation that was imposed on her, trying to hold on to something real from before while being functional enough to exist in the present. She is also, in the game's most quietly devastating detail, one of the few super mutants in the series who retained enough of her original personality that she can actually be lonely. She misses her grandchildren. She knows they are gone. She is hundreds of years old and still carrying the specific grief of someone who lost the people they loved before they were ready to lose them, in a time and place that no longer exists. The super mutant body she inhabits is enormous and powerful and functionally immortal. None of that touches the grief. Lily is one of the reasons that Fallout New Vegas is, despite its reputation as a political thriller about the future of post-war civilization, also a deeply intimate story about individual human or formerly human experience. The game takes its companions seriously enough to give them problems that are not resolvable through gameplay mechanics. Lily's quest does not end with a satisfying resolution, because there is no satisfying resolution available to her. There is just the next day, and the one after that, and the voices that are either louder or quieter depending on what she decides, and the memories that are either clearer or more distant, and the grandchildren who are in neither case any closer to being there. Bonus section. What Diamond City tells us about human resilience. Diamond City is, in the most literal sense, a city built inside a baseball stadium. The stands have been converted into residential terraces, tiered up the sides of the old playing field. The field itself is a market and public square. Still green in a world where green is rare, because someone figured out a way to keep the grass growing. The scoreboard still works, more or less. The name is still legible on the outer walls. Fenway Park, before the Great War, was one of the oldest active baseball stadiums in the United States. It was built in 1912 and was still in use in 2077. Its survival of the bombs was probably as much about construction quality as anything else older. Denser construction tends to survive nuclear events better than lighter modern building. The people of the Commonwealth found it standing, and they moved in. And over the course of the 2 centuries since, they built Diamond City. Diamond City is not a utopia. It has a mayor who is corrupt in the specific way that small-town mayors in closed communities tend to be corrupt, not dramatically evil, just compromised by the pressures of maintaining power in a place where there is no external accountability. It has racial tensions in the synth sense, non-human beings, who are treated as suspect, who face discrimination and suspicion, who have developed their own communities within and adjacent to the city. It has the particular kind of insularity that develops in places that have survived by staying small and suspicious and slow to admit outsiders. But it also has a functioning economy, a school, a newspaper, a detective agency run by a synth that most people accept as a community member, doctors, merchants, people with opinions about local politics and neighborhood disputes, and the quality of the noodle stand soup. Diamond City is what human civilization looks like when it has been reassembled from the available parts. It is not what it was. It is not even trying to be what it was. It is something new, built in the ruins of something old, using the ruins as raw material. The baseball stadium as the structure of a community is a metaphor. The game is clearly aware of the space where people once gathered to watch a game has become the space where people gather to live, and the difference between those two purposes is visible in every modification the residents have made to the original structure. The baseball history of the Commonwealth is a detail that runs through Fallout 4 as a background note references to the pre-war Red Sox season, to the specific significance of Fenway Park in Boston's cultural history, to the way that Diamond City's residents have relationship to the building they live in that is not entirely severed from the building's original purpose. They know it was a stadium. Some of them know what baseball was, or at least have second or third-hand knowledge of it. The connection to the past is tenuous but real. This is what the Fallout universe keeps showing us, in Diamond City and in Good Springs and in Megaton and in every other functioning settlement the games include. Human beings are relentlessly creative in the application of whatever is available to the purpose of building something livable. They will turn a subway station into a home, and a raider fortress into a trading post, and a ruined church into a community hall, and a baseball stadium into a city. The creativity is not glamorous. It is practical, often ugly, frequently imperfect. But it is real, and it is ongoing, and it is the mechanism by which the wasteland is slowly, imperfectly, and with great difficulty becoming something other than simply the wasteland. Diamond City is not the end point of that process. It is a point along the way. Whatever the Commonwealth is going to become, whatever the wasteland is going to become, in any of its geographic expressions will be built by people with the same creative impulse and the same practical limitations and the same complicated relationship to the past that the residents of Diamond City embody. The scoreboard at Diamond City still works. Someone maintains it. Whether the score it shows is from a pre-war game or from something the city invented after the bombs, whether anyone remembers what the numbers were supposed to mean, whether the maintenance of the scoreboard is a practical choice or a sentimental one, none of that is addressed. Someone just keeps the scoreboard running. Because it is there, and it works, and letting it go dark seems like giving something up that does not need to be given up. That is Diamond City. That is, in miniature, the entire impulse of the Fallout universe's surviving civilization. Bonus section: The Lonesome Road, the most personal DLC in Fallout history. The Lonesome Road is the final DLC for Fallout New Vegas, and it is the one that most directly addresses the courier as a person with a history. It is also the one that asks the hardest questions about what it means to be responsible for something you did not intend and may not even have known you were doing. The setup is simple. Ulysses, the man who was supposed to be Courier 6 before the player character took the job, has sent a message asking the courier to come to the Divide. The Divide was, before its catastrophic destruction, a growing settlement in the Mojave, one of the places where the post-war West was actually building something, slowly, with the fragile optimism that characterizes the best Fallout communities. The courier made deliveries there, in the years before the game's events. One of those deliveries destroyed it. The Divide is now a permanently storm-racked ruin. Constant seismic activity, caused by the still-active nuclear missiles beneath it that the courier's package triggered. Toxic storms that scour the surface and make prolonged exposure fatal without adequate protection. The marked men survivors of the initial detonation who were stripped of their skin by the blast and the storms, who continued to live in horrible pain, who are now too damaged to be anything other than hostile. The Divide is one of the most miserable places in any Fallout game, and every element of its misery has a cause, and the cause was the courier doing their job. Ulysses has been living at the Divide, not surviving, not camping, living there, deliberately, among the ruins of what he helped build before the courier's package arrived. He has been waiting because he wanted the courier to come back and see what they did, and then he wanted to have a conversation about it. The conversation he wants to have is about the nature of actions and their consequences, in a world where the actions you take are frequently separated from their consequences by time and distance and the mediation of institutions. The courier carried packages. That was their work. Couriers are not expected to know what is in their packages or what the packages will do when they arrive. The professional ethics of the role are built on a kind of instrumental neutrality. You carry what you are given to where you are told, and what happens next is not your business. Ulysses thinks this is wrong. Not the specific delivery, not the specific outcome. Those are, in his view, symptoms of a deeper problem. The problem is that the courier's professional neutrality allowed them to be the vector for a catastrophe that they could theoretically have prevented if they had asked different questions. If they had wanted to know what was in the package, if they had cared what happened at the destination. Whether Ulysses is right, whether the courier bears meaningful responsibility for the Divide's destruction, is a question the DLC refuses to answer on the player's behalf. It gives you the arguments on both sides and lets you carry whichever feels more accurate to the courier you have been playing. It allows you to agree with Ulysses, or to reject his analysis, or to find some position in between. What the Lonesome Road is ultimately about is the question of whether moral clarity is available in a world as complicated as the wasteland. Ulysses has moral clarity. He knows what he thinks happened and he knows how he feels about it, and he has built an entire plan of action using the remaining nuclear missiles in the Divide silos to destroy both the NCR and the Legion simultaneously. Around that moral clarity, he is not uncertain. He is very, very certain. The courier, if they engage with the DLC's full emotional content, arrives at the Divide as someone who did not know they had done something significant and is now being asked to account for it. The accounting is not comfortable. The arguments Ulysses makes are not entirely wrong. And the plan he has developed in response, the plan to use the courier's own history in the Divide against the two largest political factions in the Mojave, is not something that can be evaluated cleanly, because the people who would die in it are not simply abstractions. The Lonesome Road ends with choices, as the Fallout games always do, but it ends with choices that have been prepared by hours of walking through the ruins of a place you destroyed, listening to the arguments of a man who has had 2 years to develop them, in the company of 2 robots, who provide commentary and context, and the occasional moment of unexpected emotional weight. EDE. The little iBot who accompanies the courier through the Divide has more narrative significance in the Lonesome Road than almost anywhere else in the game. He carries recordings, fragments of conversations that happen near him, stored in his memory because he was in proximity to people having significant conversations, not because anyone thought to tell him to remember them. Some of those recordings involve the courier, some of them involve Ulysses, some of them involve people who are now dead. The EDE in the Divide is not necessarily the same physical unit as the EDE the player may have recruited as a companion. The DLC plays with that ambiguity, but the recordings are real, and the fragments of history they contain are real, and what they reveal about the gap between what the courier knew and what was actually happening around them is genuinely affecting. The Lonesome Road is not the most popular Fallout New Vegas DLC. Old World Blues is more beloved for its humor and its eccentric characters, and its willingness to be strange in delightful ways. Dead Money is more respected for the rigor of its horror and the precision of its tragedy. But the Lonesome Road is the one that says the most about the courier and about the particular kind of moral weight that accumulates in a world where everything you do has consequences that travel further than you can see. Bonus section: The Followers of the Apocalypse and the Long Work. Among all the factions the Fallout series has presented over the course of its history, the Followers of the Apocalypse may be the one that receives the least dramatic treatment and the most consistent respect. They do not win battles. They do not control territory. They do not have power armor or nuclear arsenals or access to pre-war government facilities. They have doctors and teachers and archivists, and they go where they are needed, and they do the work. The Followers were founded in the Los Angeles area in the years after the Great War by a woman named Nicole who believed that the keys to the wasteland's future were education and medical care and the preservation of knowledge. Her conviction was that the violence and suffering of the post-war world were products of ignorance, that people who knew more about the world and about each other would make better choices, and that communities with access to medical care and learning were more capable of sustaining themselves and cooperating with their neighbors. This is an optimistic theory. It is also a theory that is difficult to disprove in the specific terms of the Fallout universe, because the games do not show us a control group, a wasteland where the followers were never present, against which we could measure the difference their presence made. What we can observe is that in the areas where the followers have been active, things are incrementally better in ways that are hard to quantify but real. More people with access to medicine means fewer people dying of treatable injuries and illnesses. More access to learning means communities that can solve problems rather than simply enduring them. The followers appear in Fallout 1 and 2, in Fallout New Vegas, and in references in subsequent games. In New Vegas, they maintain a large compound called the Old Mormon Fort in the Freeside district of the city, the poor district, outside the walls of the Strip, where the people with the least access to resources are concentrated. This is not an accident. The followers go where the need is greatest, which is usually where the power is least. Their ethical commitments occasionally bring them into conflict with other factions. The Brotherhood of Steel, in particular, has a complicated relationship with the followers. The Brotherhood wants to control technology and information, and the followers want to distribute it freely, and these positions are difficult to reconcile. The NCR has used the followers in various capacities as field medics and advisors, while also being suspicious of an organization that distributes care without asking for political loyalty in return. The followers do not ask for political loyalty. They do not have a political project in the conventional sense. They have a set of values. Knowledge should be shared. Medicine should be available to those who need it. Education is a public good, and they pursue those values where the pursuit is possible, without waiting for political conditions that never quite arrive. This makes them easy to overlook in the context of the Fallout universe's more dramatic conflicts. While the NCR and the Legion are fighting over the Hoover Dam, the followers are in Freeside treating injured civilians. While the Brotherhood of Steel is acquiring pre-war technology in the capital wasteland, the followers are running a clinic in the ruins of Rivet City. The camera of the game's main storylines is not usually pointed at the followers, because they are not trying to win the kind of victories that games typically model. But they are present. They are doing the work. And in a universe that takes seriously the question of what survives and what endures, the followers of the apocalypse are one of the more honest answers to both questions. What survives? The conviction that human beings owe each other care and knowledge, even when the circumstances make providing those things very difficult. What endures? The work itself, carried forward by individual followers who chose this life over alternatives that might have been safer or more comfortable or more immediately rewarding. The followers are not heroes, in the sense that the wasteland usually celebrates. They do not win decisive battles or make choices that determine the fate of regions. They are, in the long view, more important than any of that. They are the people who make it possible for the wasteland to be something other than a collection of competing interests consuming each other. Whether the wasteland will eventually produce the kind of civilization that would make the followers' work unnecessary, a world with enough stability and enough distributed resources that care and education are simply available, rather than heroically provided, is a question that sits at the horizon of every Fallout game, always visible but never reached. The followers are walking toward it anyway. That is what they do. Closing note: the wasteland keeps going. The Fallout universe is not finished. The games will continue. The television show will continue. The lore will accumulate. And some of the questions we spent tonight with will eventually receive answers, while others will deepen into further mysteries. That is the nature of a living fiction. It does not stand still. It grows in the direction of the questions its audience keeps asking. The questions that have sustained Fallout across almost 30 years of games are not primarily questions about plot, who will control the Hoover Dam, whether the Brotherhood of Steel will survive, what the Institute was really building toward. Those are interesting questions with interesting answers, but they are not what makes people come back. What makes people come back is the feeling that the wasteland contains more than you can find in a single playthrough. That there is always another holotape, another terminal entry, another skeleton arranged in a position that means something if you take the time to figure out what. That the obelisk in the Dunwich building is connected to something in the Lucky Hole mine, and something in the Dunwich borer's quarry, and something in the Point Lookout swamps, and that the connection runs deeper than any single game has traced it. That the mysterious stranger has been in too many places for too long for the explanation to be simple, and that Nick Valentine's case file on him will not close easily. That is what keeps you walking. The road is long. The ruins are quiet at this hour. Whatever is sleeping at the bottom of the Lucky Hole, mine is still sleeping, and whatever is in the flooded pool beneath Dunwich borers is still looking up at the surface from below, and the Sierra Madre is still broadcasting Begin Again to anyone with a receiver and the misfortune to tune to that frequency. You made it through tonight. You know more about the wasteland than you did when we started, and you carry more questions than you had before. And those two things are not contradictions. They are the same thing, expressed from different angles. Rest well. The wasteland will be here when you come back. It always is.